The chandelier trembled as Rachel Bennett backed against the mahogany bar, trapped between two martial arts champions who thought a CEO in Louboutins would be easy prey. Then a server in a stained apron stepped forward, just another nobody. They laughed until his collar slipped, revealing the eagle globe and anchor etched into weathered skin. The temperature in the Crystal Garden dropped 20 degrees. Without throwing a single punch, without even raising his voice, Jake Walker sent two black belts retreating into the Manhattan night like schoolboys who'd just glimpsed the devil himself. Welcome to my story, friends. Stick around to see how one quiet Marine changed everything, and drop a comment about where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these tales travel. The Crystal Garden wasn't just another upscale Manhattan bar. It was a temple to excess where Wall Street titans sealed billion-dollar deals over 30-year-old scotch, and where the chandelier alone costs more than most people's houses. Rachel Bennett knew every corner of this place had closed more mergers here than she could count, but tonight felt different. Wrong, somehow. She should have listened to that instinct. Another bourbon Ms. Bennett, Marcus the head bartender, already had the Pappy Van Winkle ready. He'd been serving her for 3 years, now knew her habits better than her own assistant. "Make it a double," Rachel said, checking her phone for the 5th time in as many minutes. The Harrington acquisition documents still hadn't arrived, and her legal team had gone radio silent. At 34, she was the youngest Fortune 500 CEO in the country, but moments like these reminded her that success painted a target on your back. The Crystal Garden hummed with its usual Friday night energy, investment bankers celebrating bonuses, tech entrepreneurs pitching to venture capitalists, trophy wives comparing jewelry. Rachel had learned to tune out the noise to focus on what mattered. Numbers, deals, victory. That's when she noticed them. 2 men at the far end of the bar, both wearing expensive suits that didn't quite fit the way they moved. Athletes. Rachel's mind registered automatically. She'd dated enough of them in college to recognize the type, the way they held themselves coiled and ready, even when pretending to relax. These two were different, though. Dangerous different. "Marcus," she said quietly, "those two at the end. How long have they been here?" Marcus glanced over his professional smile, never wavering. "About an hour, Ms. Bennett. Friends of yours?" "No." Rachel's fingers tightened around her glass. "No, they're not." She recognized the taller one now, Derek Chen, a mixed martial arts champion who'd been in the news recently for all the wrong reasons. Assault charges that mysteriously disappeared, a girlfriend who'd recanted her testimony with bruises still visible on her arms, the kind of man who treated violence like a business card. His companion she didn't know, but the cauliflower ears and scarred knuckles told their own story. Another fighter, another predator. Rachel pulled out her phone, ready to call her driver, but Chen was already moving. Not obviously he was too smart for that, just gradually closing the distance, his friend flanking from the other side. Classic pack behavior. "Gentlemen," Marcus said firmly, stepping forward, "perhaps I can interest you in a table we have excellent—" "We're good right here," Chen said, his eyes never leaving Rachel. "Just want to say hello to the famous Ms. Bennett. You are Rachel Bennett, aren't you? The one who just cost my sponsor $50 million in that hostile takeover?" Rachel's blood chilled. The Stryker Athletics deal. She'd gutted them in negotiations, proved their books were cooked, saved her own shareholders a fortune. She hadn't known Chen was connected to them. "Business is business," she said, evenly standing. "Nothing personal." Funny thing about that, Chen moved closer, his friend completing the triangle, boxing her in against the bar. "Everything feels personal when you lose 8 figures. The Crystal Garden's usual chatter continued around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding in their midst. That was the thing about places like this, everyone was so absorbed in their own importance, they missed the danger right in front of them. "I'm leaving," Rachel said, but when she tried to move, Chen's friend stepped into her path. "Leaving so soon?" Chen's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "But we haven't even been properly introduced. I'm Derek. This is Tommy. We're what you might call problem solvers." "Security," Marcus called out. But the Crystal Garden security was mostly for show retired cops more interested in their pensions than confrontation. "Relax, barkeep," Tommy said. "We're just talking. Right, Miss Bennett?" Just a friendly conversation about how things work in the real world. Rachel felt the bar's edge pressing into her back. Her self-defense classes from college seemed laughably inadequate now. These weren't drunk frat boys. These were trained killers who'd found a legal outlet for their violence. "You cost us money, Chen said, leaning in close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "That requires compensation." "I'll scream," Rachel said. "In the Crystal Garden." Chen laughed. "Half these people are coked out of their minds. The other half are too important to get involved." "You think anyone here wants to be a witness?" He was right. Rachel looked around desperately, but everyone was deliberately not watching. The unwritten rule of places like this: see nothing, say nothing, stay out of the splash zone. That's when she saw him. A server working the back section near the kitchen doors. Shaggy brown hair that needed a cut, worn dress shoes that had been resoled more than once, the standard Crystal Garden uniform hanging loose on a lean frame. He was clearing a table, movements economical and precise, but his eyes were tracking the situation. Chen followed her gaze and snorted. "What you hoping the help's gonna save you?" "Hey, busboy." The server looked up and Rachel saw something flicker across his face. Not fear, something else. Something older. "Mind your business, minimum wage," Tommy added. "This doesn't concern you." The server set down the tray he'd been carrying, walked toward them with an unhurried gait that somehow covered the distance faster than it should have. Up close, Rachel could see the lines around his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into desert sun. A faded scar along his jawline that looked like shrapnel. "Actually," the server said, and his voice was soft, almost gentle, "it does." Chen laughed. "You kidding me? You know who I am." Derek Chen, two-time MMA heavyweight champion, trained under Sergio Moreira in Rio, kickboxing record of 32-3, currently suspended pending investigation for aggravated assault. Chen's smile faltered. "You a fan?" "No." The server positioned himself between Rachel and the two men, a human shield and a stained apron. "I just like to know who I'm dealing with." "And who the hell are you?" Tommy stepped forward, using his size to intimidate. "Jake Walker. I bust tables." "Well, Jake Walker, who busses tables," Chen said, recovering his swagger. "Unless you want to be bussing tables through a feeding tube, I suggest you walk away." Jake tilted his head slightly, considering. "Can't do that." "Can't?" Chen's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You have any idea what I could do to you?" "Yes." Jake's response was simple, matter-of-fact. "You could hurt me. Badly. Probably put me in the hospital. Maybe worse." "Then why?" "Because that's what you could do to me," Jake continued in that same soft tone. "But it's not what you're going to do." Tommy burst out laughing. "This guy's hilarious. You hear this? Derek busboy thinks he's a hero." But Chen wasn't laughing anymore. He was studying Jake the way a fighter studies an opponent, looking for Tell's weaknesses, fear, finding none. "You military?" Chen asked suddenly. "I was." "What branch?" Jake didn't answer, but something in his stance shifted. Subtle, but Chen caught it. The way his weight distributed the angle of his shoulders. Not aggressive, but ready. Always ready. "Doesn't matter," Tommy said, reaching for Jake's shoulder. "Military cop, whatever. You're still just one guy, and there's two of us." His hand grabbed Jake's collar, yanking it aside to emphasize his point. The cheap fabric tore slightly, revealing the tattoo underneath. An eagle globe and anchor. The Marine Corps emblem, but not just any version. This one had additional scrollwork dates, a rifle crossed with a K-bar knife. Unit insignia that Tommy didn't recognize, but Chen did. Chen's face went pale. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "You're one of them. You're a raider." The change in the atmosphere was instant and absolute. Tommy's hand dropped from Jake's collar like it was electrified. Both fighters took an involuntary step back. "What?" Tommy looked confused. "What's a raider sus?" "Marine Raiders," Chen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Special operations. The guys they send when SEALs aren't enough." Jake stood perfectly still, neither confirming nor denying. But the tattoo told its own story. The dates were partially visible. Fallujah, Euphor Ramadi, 06 names and places that had become legend in military circles. My brother was in Iraq, Chen said, his entire demeanor changed. Army, he told me about you guys, said you were different. Everyone who went over there was different when they came back, Jake said quietly. Rachel watched this transformation with amazement. 2 minutes ago, these men were ready to do God knows what to her. Now they looked like kids who just realized they were playing with live grenades. Look, man, Tommy said, hands raised in a placating gesture. We didn't know. You were just about to assault a woman in a crowded bar because you thought no one would stop you, Jake said. His voice never rose, but something in it made both fighters flinch. That about right? It's not like that, Chen protested. She cost us. I don't care what she cost you. Jake took a single step forward. Both martial artist men who'd spent their lives learning not to retreat backed up. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Ms. Bennett. Then you're going to leave. And if I see you within 50 feet of her again, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. You threatening us? Tommy tried to recover some bravado. Jake almost smiled. Marines don't threaten. We make promises. The silence stretched between them taut as piano wire. Rachel could hear her own heartbeat, could see the calculation in Chen's eyes. He was a professional fighter, had probably never backed down from anyone in his life. But something about Jake, about the absolute calm certainty in his stance, made the decision for him. Sorry, Chen muttered to Rachel, not meeting her eyes. Misunderstanding. Tommy, Jake said softly. Yeah, sorry, Tommy added quickly. Won't happen again. They left without another word, walking out of the Crystal Garden like men fleeing a burning building. The moment the door closed behind them, Jake's shoulders sagged slightly. He turned to Rachel, and for the first time she saw warmth in his eyes. You okay, ma'am? Yes. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. You would have been fine, Jake said. Marcus was already calling the real cops, not just security. Those two are bullies, not idiots. They wouldn't have done anything with witnesses. But you stepped in anyway. Jake shrugged. Old habits. Marcus approached cautiously, eyes wide. Jake, I had no idea you were... your resume just said military service. It's not something I advertise. Jake looked down at his torn shirt. Gonna need another one of these. Are you kidding? Take the week off paid. Hell, take 2 weeks. Marcus was practically vibrating with excitement. You just faced down Derek Chen. Do you know who that is? Yeah, Jake said tiredly. I know. He started to walk back toward the kitchen, but Rachel caught his arm. Wait, please, let me at least buy you a drink, or dinner, or something. Jake paused, looking at her hand on his arm with an unreadable expression. I appreciate it, ma'am, but I've got to finish my shift. Tables don't bust themselves. You're going back to work after that. Bills don't stop coming just because you have an interesting evening. He gently disengaged from her grip. Besides, I've got someone counting on me getting paid Friday. Rachel watched him disappear through the kitchen doors, her mind racing. She'd built her career on reading people, on understanding what drove them. But Jake Walker was a puzzle, a Marine Raider working as a busboy. There was a story there, and Rachel Bennett had never met a story she didn't want to unravel. Marcus, she called. Everything you know about Jake Walker, now. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Miss Bennett, I don't think... Please. She pulled out her black card. I'll cover the bar tab for everyone here tonight. Just tell me about him. Marcus glanced around, then leaned in conspiratorially. Been here about 8 months. Never late, never complains, works every shift they'll give him. Lives in Queens, takes the subway. That's all I know, honest. He keeps to himself. Family. He's got a kid, little girl, seen her once when she was sick and he couldn't find a sitter. Sweet thing, maybe 9 or 10. Sat in the break room doing homework while he worked. A single father. Former special operations. Working for tips in a Manhattan bar. The pieces didn't fit, and that intrigued Rachel more than any corporate merger ever had. She stayed until closing, nursing a single drink, watching Jake work through the kitchen door windows. He moved with economy and purpose, never wasted energy, never showed the strain that must have been there. Other servers chatted and joked. Jake just worked. At 2 a.m., she watched him leave through the employee exit, shoulders hunched against the cold, that same worn jacket pulled tight. He didn't look back, didn't notice her watching from her town car. Or maybe he did notice and just didn't care. "Where to, Ms. Bennett?" her driver asked. "Follow him," she said impulsively. Carefully. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "Just to make sure he gets home safe. After what he did for me, it's the least I can do." They followed the lone figure through empty streets to the subway station, watched him descend into the fluorescent underworld of late-night New York transit. Rachel had never taken the subway after midnight, had never needed to. But Jake Walker did it every night, returning to whatever life waited for him in Queens. "Shall I wait, ma'am?" the driver asked. "No." Rachel pulled out her phone, started texting her assistant. "But I want everything on a Jake Walker Marine Corps probably served between 2000 and 2015. Focus on special operations units, financial record service history, everything." "It's 2 in the morning, ma'am." "Then Diane will have something to do when she wakes up." The next morning, or technically later that same morning, Rachel stood outside a modest apartment building in Forest Hills, Queens. It had taken Diane exactly 3 hours to compile a basic dossier on Jake Walker, and what Rachel read had kept her awake the rest of the night. Enlisted at 18 right out of high school in Ohio, selected for Marine Raiders after 3 tours in Iraq. Classified operations across Afghanistan, Syria, places that weren't supposed to have American troops. Bronze Star with Valor. Purple Heart twice. Honorable discharge 5 years ago, right after his wife died in a car accident. The wife's death had been the key to understanding everything else. Sarah Walker, elementary school teacher, killed by a drunk driver while Jake was deployed. He'd come home to a motherless daughter and a world that no longer made sense. No wonder he'd left the military. No wonder he was bussing tables. He was just trying to survive, to be present for the only family he had left. Rachel stood outside his building, holding a bag from the expensive bakery down the street and questioning her sanity. She'd canceled 3 meetings to be here, had driven her assistant crazy with demands for more information. This wasn't like her. Rachel Bennett didn't chase after men, especially not ones who'd made it clear they weren't interested. But she couldn't forget the way he'd stepped between her and danger without hesitation. Couldn't forget the quiet authority in his voice, the way 2 trained fighters had backed down from a man in an apron. She pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B. "Yeah." The voice was young female. "Is this the Walker residence? I'm looking for Jake Walker." "Dad's asleep. He worked late." The daughter. Rachel felt like an intruder. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Rachel Bennett. Your father helped me last night, and I wanted to thank him." There was a pause, then the sound of muffled conversation. A minute later, the door buzzed open. Rachel climbed 3 flights of stairs covered in worn carpet that had seen better decades. The hallway smelled of cooking food and life. Real life, not the sanitized existence of her penthouse. Apartment 3B's door was already open, a young girl standing in the doorway with suspicious eyes that were pure Jake. "I'm Ellie," she said. "You're the lady from Dad's work." "Something like that." Rachel held up the bakery bag. "I brought pastries. Is that okay?" Ellie considered this with the seriousness of a judge. "Dad says we shouldn't take charity." "It's not charity. It's thank you. There's a difference." "Is there God, she was sharp. Rachel could see Jake's intelligence there, refined and focused in this tiny guardian of their threshold. "Ellie, who are you talking to?" Jake appeared in the doorway, still in sweatpants and a faded Marine's t-shirt, hair sticking up at odd angles. He stopped short when he saw Rachel. "Ms. Bennett." "Rachel, please." She felt suddenly ridiculous in her designer clothes, holding a $40 bag of croissants. "I wanted to thank you properly for last night." Jake ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "You didn't need to come all the way out here." "Dad, she brought food," Ellie said pragmatically. "From Marche Blanc." "How do you know Marche Blanc?" "I read the bag. Also, Stacy's mom brought cupcakes from there for her birthday. They were amazing." Jake sighed, looking from his daughter to Rachel. She could see him weighing politeness against boundaries, fatherhood against pride. 5 minutes, he said finally. "Ellie, go get dressed. You've got soccer practice in an hour." The apartment was small but meticulously clean. Military clean, Rachel recognized. Everything had a place. Everything in its place. The walls were covered with Ellie's artwork and academic achievement certificates. A folded flag in a triangle case sat on the mantel next to a picture of a woman who must have been Sarah Ellie had her smile. Coffee, Jake offered, moving to the kitchen that was really just an extension of the living room. Please. She watched him work, noticed the way he favored his left leg slightly. Old injury, probably. The dossier had mentioned multiple combat wounds, but hadn't specified. You did research on me, he said, without turning around. It wasn't a question. I did. Find what you were looking for. I found facts. Not the same as understanding. Jake brought 2 mugs of coffee, nothing fancy, just good strong coffee and chipped ceramic mugs that had stories of their own. What's to understand I'm a veteran trying to raise his daughter? End of story. A Marine Raider with enough commendations to paper a wall working as a busboy. Those commendations don't pay rent. They could. Private security consulting a dozen firms would hire you in a heartbeat. Jake's jaw tightened. And work 60-hour weeks, travel constantly. Miss every soccer game, every school play, every moment that actually matters. No thanks. So you chose her over career. There was no choice. His voice softened, looking at Ellie's pictures on the wall. The day Sarah died, I promised I'd be the father Ellie deserved, not the ghost who sent postcards from war zones. Rachel felt something shift in her chest, a tightness she hadn't realized was there. She'd built her whole life around career, around the next acquisition, the next victory. The idea of giving that up for someone else was foreign to her, but sitting in Jake's modest kitchen, she could see the beauty in it. Dad, I can't find my shin guards, Ellie called from her room. Check the dryer, Jake called back then to Rachel. Single-parent glamour. You're doing an amazing job. She's brilliant. She's everything. Jake stood. Look, Ms. Bennett. Rachel, I appreciate the gesture, but last night was nothing special. It's what anyone would have done. No, Rachel said firmly. It's not. Those men had everyone in that bar cowed, including security. You were the only one who acted. I acted because I've seen what happens when good people do nothing. Seen it in too many places, lost too many friends learning that lesson. He paused, something dark crossing his features. Sometimes standing up is the only thing that separates us from the monsters. Found them. Ellie bounded into the room fully dressed in soccer gear. Oh, good. You're still here. Dad never has anyone over. Ellie, what? It's true. Unless you count Mrs. Chen from downstairs, but she just brings food and tries to set you up with her niece. Rachel laughed at Jake's mortified expression. Mrs. Chen has good taste. Her niece is 22, Jake muttered. Age is just a number, Ellie said sagely, then grabbed a croissant from the bag. Can I eat in the car? We don't have a car. We're taking the subway. The subway to Astoria? Rachel checked her phone. That's 40 minutes each way. It's good reading time, Ellie said, pulling a worn paperback from her backpack. I'm on book 4 of Harry Potter. Rachel made a decision. My driver's downstairs. Let us give you a ride. We couldn't, Jake started. Please. Rachel met his eyes. You saved me from a bad situation. Let me save you from the Q train on a Saturday morning. Jake looked at Ellie, who was practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of riding in what she'd clearly identified as a fancy car. Just this once, he said. The ride to Astoria was a revelation. Ellie peppered Rachel with questions about business, about college, about how she'd become a CEO. Jake tried to rein her in, but Rachel was charmed by the girl's curiosity. Dad says I ask too many questions, Ellie said. Questions are how we learn, Rachel replied. I asked a million questions when I was your age. Did your parents mind? Rachel's smile faltered slightly. My parents were busy. I mostly asked questions of books. She felt Jake's eyes on her, reading between the lines. The poor little rich girl cliché, except in Rachel's case, it had been true. Boarding schools and trust funds instead of family dinners and bedtime stories. At the soccer field, Ellie hugged her father and ran off to join her team. Jake and Rachel stood by the sideline watching kids chase a ball with the intensity of World Cup players. You don't have to stay, Jake said. I know. But she didn't move. There was something peaceful about this. Something real. No board meetings, no hostile takeovers, just parents cheering for kids on a Saturday morning. Number 7's got potential, she said, watching a girl dribble past 3 defenders. That's Ellie. Of course it is. They watched in comfortable silence for a while. Rachel noticed other parents glancing their way, probably wondering what the woman in $1,000 shoes was doing at a youth soccer game in Queens. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Shoot. Last night with Chen and his friend, were you really prepared to fight them? Jake considered the question. Fighting was the last option. Usually the threat of consequences is enough. And if it wasn't, then I would have done what was necessary to protect you. He said it simply like stating the weather. But it rarely comes to that. Most bullies are cowards. They fold when someone stands up to them. You've stood up to a lot of bullies. Here and there, Rachel wanted to push to ask about the places those dates on his tattoo represented, but something in his tone suggested those were doors better left closed. Dad, did you see that? Ellie ran over during a water break, face flushed with excitement. I scored. I saw baby. Great footwork. Ellie beamed, then looked at Rachel. Are you staying for the whole game? If that's okay? It's awesome Dad never has anyone to talk to except the other parents, and they're boring. She ran back to the field before Jake could respond, leaving him shaking his head. She's got no filter, he said apologetically. She's perfect, Rachel said and meant it. The game ended with Ellie's team winning 3-2. As they walked back to the car, Ellie chattering about every play, Rachel's phone rang. The Harrington acquisition. She'd completely forgotten. I need to take this, she said apologetically. We can take the subway back, Jake offered. Don't. She covered the phone. Please, give me 5 minutes. The call actually took 15 minutes, with Rachel pacing beside the car, speaking in the sharp, authoritative tone that had intimidated CEOs twice her age. When she finished, Jake and Ellie were sitting on a nearby bench, heads together over Ellie's book, Jake helping her with a difficult word. The sight stopped Rachel cold. This was what she'd missed, what all her success couldn't buy. Simple moments of connection, of family. Sorry, she said, rejoining them. Work crisis. Did you fix it? Ellie asked. I did. Good. Dad says if you're going to do something, do it right. On the ride back, Ellie fell asleep against her father's shoulder, exhausted from the game. Jake held her carefully, adjusting when the car turned to keep her comfortable. Thank you, he said quietly, for today. She'll remember this. I will too. Their eyes met, and Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not attraction, she'd felt that plenty. This was different. This was recognition, like finding a piece of yourself you didn't know was missing. When they reached the apartment building, Jake carefully lifted Ellie, still sleeping, from the car. Would you like to come up? He asked. I make a decent sandwich and you missed lunch. Rachel looked at her phone. 3 missed calls from her assistant. 5 urgent emails, a text from the chairman of the board. Then she looked at Jake, standing there with his daughter in his arms, offering her something as simple and precious as a sandwich and conversation. I'd love to. The sandwich Jake made was simple turkey Swiss mustard on wheat, but Rachel ate it like it was crafted by a Michelin-starred chef. They sat at his small kitchen table while Ellie napped in her room, the afternoon sun slanting through windows that needed cleaning, but somehow made the light softer, warmer. You're not what I expected, Jake said, watching her eat with genuine appetite instead of the bird-like picking he'd probably imagined from someone of her social status. What did you expect? I don't know, more, distance, I guess? You run a Fortune 500 company. I bus tables. Rachel set down the sandwich, meeting his eyes directly. You stepped between me and 2 dangerous men without hesitation. That tells me more about who you are than any job title ever could. Jake shifted uncomfortably, the way she'd noticed he did whenever someone tried to paint him as heroic. Anyone would have... Stop, Rachel interrupted. Please stop saying that. We both know it's not true. That bar was full of people, including paid security, and you were the only one who acted. Own it. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You always this direct? Always. It's why I'm good at what I do. And what exactly do you do? I mean, I know you're a CEO, but what does that actually mean day to day? Rachel found herself explaining her world to him. The hostile takeovers, the board meetings, the constant chess game of corporate warfare. Jake listened with the same focused attention she'd seen him give to Ellie's soccer game, asking questions that cut straight to the heart of things. Sounds exhausting, he said when she finished. It is, but it's also... She searched for the right word. Addictive. The adrenaline, the victory, the knowledge that you've outmaneuvered someone who thought they were smarter than you. I get that, Jake said quietly. Different context, same rush. Rachel wanted to ask about his context, about the places those scars came from, but Ellie chose that moment to emerge from her room, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Dad, can we make lemon pie? You promised. I did promise, Jake agreed. Then looked at Rachel. You're welcome to stay. Fair warning, though, Ellie takes her baking very seriously. Rachel should have left. She had contracts to review, calls to return, a company to run. Instead, she found herself saying, I haven't baked anything since home economics in middle school. Perfect, Ellie said, suddenly fully awake. You can be my sous chef. What followed was 2 hours of controlled chaos. Ellie directed operations with the intensity of a general, while Jake provided color commentary and prevented several near disasters. Rachel found herself laughing more than she had in years. Flour in her designer clothes, lemon juice stinging a paper cut she didn't remember getting. No, 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 Ellie said, watching Rachel attempt to crimp the pie crust. Like this, see Dad show her. Jake moved behind Rachel, his hands covering hers, guiding them through the motion. She could smell his soap, something basic and clean, could feel the calluses on his palms from years of handling weapons. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. There, he said softly, stepping back. You've got it. The pie went into the oven, and Ellie declared movie time while it baked. They ended up on the worn couch, Ellie in the middle, watching some animated film Rachel had never heard of, but that apparently required detailed commentary from Ellie about every character's motivation. She's scared, Ellie explained about the protagonist. That's why she's being mean. Sometimes people are mean when they're scared. Rachel caught Jake's eye over his daughter's head. He knew she was thinking about Chen, about all the corporate sharks who attacked when they felt threatened. The pie timer went off just as the movie ended. It was perfect golden brown with the lemon filling bubbling through the decorative slits Ellie had carefully cut. We have to let it cool, Ellie said seriously. That's the hardest part. While they waited, Ellie showed Rachel her room, a careful balance between little girl and approaching teenager. School awards covered one-wall, soccer trophies lined a shelf, and books were everywhere. Dad built those shelves, Ellie said proudly, pointing to custom bookcases that fit perfectly in the odd angles of the old building. He can build anything. Rachel ran her fingers along the smooth wood, noting the precise joints, the attention to detail. Everything Jake did, he did with complete commitment. Pie's ready? Jake called from the kitchen. They ate it warm with vanilla ice cream Jake had to run to the corner bodega to buy because he'd forgotten they were out. Rachel, who hadn't eaten dessert in years, without calculating calories in gym time, cleaned her plate. This is incredible, she said, and meant it. Secret family recipe, Ellie said proudly. Dad's mom taught him, and her mom taught her, and it goes back forever. Not quite forever, Jake corrected gently. But a long time. Rachel's phone buzzed, then again, then continuously. She glanced at it, 17 missed calls, her assistant in full panic mode. I should go, she said reluctantly. Probably, Jake agreed, but he didn't sound any happier about it than she felt. At the door, Ellie hugged her, unexpectedly fierce and quick. Will you come back? Rachel looked at Jake, who was carefully not influencing his daughter's invitation. If your dad's okay with it. Dad? Jake studied Rachel for a long moment, and she felt like he was seeing through all her armor, all her carefully constructed walls. You're welcome anytime, he said finally. In the car on the way back to Manhattan, Rachel realized she'd forgotten to be Rachel Bennett, CEO, for an entire afternoon. She'd just been Rachel learning to make pie, watching movies, being part of something normal and warm and real. Her phone rang. The chairman of the board. Where the hell have you been? Richard Blackstone's voice was tight with anger. "The Harrington deal is falling apart. I handled Harrington this morning. Well, they're back with new demands. We need you here now." Rachel looked out the window at Queens passing by at regular people living regular lives. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She worked until 3 a.m. salvaging the deal through sheer force of will and an encyclopedic knowledge of corporate law. But even as she decimated Harrington's legal team, part of her mind was back in that small kitchen learning to crimp pie crust while a 9-year-old girl directed operations like a tiny general. Sunday passed in a blur of contracts and conference calls. Monday brought new crises, new battles to fight. But Tuesday afternoon, Rachel found herself clearing her calendar after 4 p.m. "You have the Morrison Review at 4:30, yes," Diane, her assistant, reminded her. "Move it to tomorrow. The board meeting prep. Email me the materials, I'll review them tonight." Diane stared at her. In 5 years, Rachel had never left early, never postponed a meeting without a reason involving millions of dollars. "Are you feeling all right?" Diane asked. "I'm fine, just prioritizing differently." She arrived at the Crystal Garden at 4:15, knowing Jake's shift started at 4. He was already there setting up his section, moving with that same economical grace. "Checking up on me?" he asked when he saw her. "Hungry," she corrected. "Long day, needed a drink." "At 4 in the afternoon. It's 5 o'clock somewhere." Jake almost smiled. She was starting to recognize the tiny tell in the corner of his eyes. "Your usual table's free." She sat where she could watch him work, ordered a drink she didn't want, and appetizers she didn't need. Marcus raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The Crystal Garden was mostly empty this early, just a few day traders celebrating wins or drowning losses. "You know he's single, right?" Marcus said when he brought her drink. "Marcus." "I'm just saying. Good man. Raising that kid alone. Never complains, never calls in sick, never starts drama. You could do worse." "He's not interested." Marcus laughed. "You sure about that man hasn't taken his eyes off you since you walked in?" Rachel glanced over, caught Jake watching her. He didn't look away, just held her gaze for a moment before returning to his work. She stayed through the dinner rush, ostensibly working on her laptop, but really watching Jake handle difficult customers with infinite patience, heavy trays with easy strength, chaos with calm competence. This was his battlefield now, she realized. He'd traded warfare for waiting tables and somehow made it noble. Around 8, a commotion at the bar drew her attention. A young server, barely 21, had dropped a tray full of drinks on a customer's designer suit. The man was screaming, face red, jabbing his finger at the terrified girl. "You stupid little bitch! Do you have any idea how much this cost?" Before Rachel could intervene, Jake was there. He positioned himself between the angry customer and the crying server, not aggressive, just present. "Sir, I apologize for the accident. We'll cover your cleaning costs, of course." "Cleaning? This is ruined. Armani doesn't clean, you idiot." Jake's expression didn't change. "Then we'll work with our insurance to cover replacement. Michelle, go take a break." The young server fled to the kitchen. The customer denied his target, turned his rage on Jake. "You think you're some kind of hero protecting that incompetent—" "I think accidents happen," Jake said calmly. "And I think a man who screams at young women over spilled drinks might want to reconsider his priorities." The threat of violence hung in the air. The customer's hands clenched into fists. Jake didn't move, didn't tense, just waited with the patience of a man who'd faced down much worse than angry Wall Street bros. "I want to speak to the manager," the man spat. "You're speaking to him." Marcus appeared, having watched the whole thing. "And I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Jake, please escort this gentleman out." "I'll sue. I'll own this place." "You're welcome to try," Rachel said, standing and walking over. The man's eyes widened in recognition. "But I should warn you, I just acquired the law firm that handles the Crystal Garden's legal affairs. We don't lose." The man looked between Rachel and Jake, calculating odds. "This is bullshit." "Yes," Jake agreed pleasantly. "It is. Your coat's at the check. Have a good evening." After the man left, the young server emerged from the kitchen, eyes red and puffy. "Mr. Walker, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean—" "Michelle," Jake said gently. "Everyone drops trays. I dropped 3 my first week." Really? Really? Cost me most of my first paycheck. You're doing fine. The girl hugged him impulsively, then fled back to the kitchen in embarrassment. Jake stood there looking uncomfortable with the gratitude. You're good at that, Rachel observed. At what? Taking care of people. Jake shrugged. Someone has to. She wanted to argue that it didn't always have to be him, but she was beginning to understand that for Jake it did. It was who he was coded into his DNA as surely as his brown eyes and quiet strength. I should get back to work, he said. Jake. She caught his arm. Have dinner with me. Not here, not now. Saturday night. Somewhere nice. Rachel. Just dinner. Ellie can come if you want. She has a sleepover Saturday. Even better, no distractions. Jake looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing a dozen factors she couldn't guess at. One dinner, he said finally. One dinner, she agreed. The week crawled by. Rachel, who usually lived for the next big deal, found herself distracted in meetings, checking her phone not for market updates, but for the time counting down to Saturday. She'd made reservations at 4 different restaurants before settling on a small Italian place in Brooklyn that had incredible reviews but no pretension. Saturday afternoon, she changed outfits 5 times before laughing at herself. She was Rachel Bennett. She'd stared down hostile boards, built an empire from nothing, made grown men cry in negotiations. One dinner with a Marine-turned-busboy shouldn't reduce her to teenage uncertainty. But it did. Jake had suggested meeting at the restaurant, but Rachel insisted on picking him up. She wanted to see him off his feet for once, wanted to drive him instead of watching him take the subway. He was waiting outside his building when she arrived, wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that had seen better days but somehow looked perfect on him. His hair was still a little too long, still slightly unruly, but his shoes were polished to military precision. You look nice, she said when he got in the car. You look like you're worth more than my apartment building. Is that a compliment? Just an observation. The restaurant was perfect intimate without being romantic excellent food, without excessive fuss. Jake studied the wine list with unexpected expertise. Didn't figure you for a wine guy, Rachel said. I'm not, but my squad leader was. Spent 2 years listening to him describe every vineyard in France while we ate MREs in the desert. Some of it stuck. They ordered, and Rachel found herself asking the question she'd been avoiding all week. Tell me about Sarah. Jake's hand stilled on his water glass. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. She was everything I wasn't, he said finally. Warm, open, saw the best in everyone. She taught second grade, loved those kids like they were ours. We met when I was home on leave at a coffee shop of all places. She spilled her latte on my dress blues. Sounds like fate. Sounds like Sarah. She was always spilling things, running into walls, tripping over air. Most gracefully clumsy person I ever met. His smile was distant, lost in memory. She waited for me through 4 deployments. 4. Do you know what that's like? Wondering every day if someone's going to knock on your door with a flag? I can't imagine. She never complained, not once. Just said she knew I'd come home because I was too stubborn to die. Jake's voice roughened. Turns out she was the one who needed to be stubborn. Rachel reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. How did Ellie handle it? She was 6, old enough to understand, too young to really process it. She had nightmares for a year, wouldn't let me out of her sight. That's when I knew I had to get out. She'd already lost one parent. She couldn't spend her life wondering if she'd lose the other. So you gave up your career. I gave up a job. I kept everything that mattered. He turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. What about you? Ever been married, engaged once, to another CEO? We approached it like a merger, synergies, market advantages, combined portfolios. Lasted 6 months before we realized we'd forgotten one small detail. What? Actually liking each other. Jake laughed, the first full laugh she'd heard from him. It transformed his face, erasing years of weight. That might be important, he agreed. Their food arrived and conversation flowed easier. Jake told her about growing up in rural Ohio, about joining the Marines because college wasn't an option and the factory wasn't a future. Rachel found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, the loneliness of success, the weight of always being the smartest person in the room, the fear that she'd built an empire but forgotten to build a life. You're still young, Jake said. Plenty of time to build whatever you want. I'm 34. In corporate years, that's middle-aged. In human years, it's just getting started. After dinner, they walked through Brooklyn, no particular destination in mind. The night was warm for autumn, the streets alive with weekend energy. They passed young couples, families, groups of friends, all living their lives with an ease Rachel envied. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The military," Jake considered. "I miss the simplicity. Not that the missions were simple, but the purpose was. Protect your squad, complete the objective, come home alive. Now," he gestured at the city around them. "Everything's complicated. Bills, school districts, health insurance, whether Ellie's watching too much TV or not, enough news if I'm raising her right or screwing her up. From what I've seen, you're doing an amazing job. From what you've seen, I'm barely keeping my head above water." Rachel stopped walking, turned to face him. "You're working yourself to exhaustion to provide for your daughter. You're present for every moment that matters to her. You stood up for me when no one else would protected that young server tonight. You're a good man, Jake Walker. Maybe the best I've met." Something shifted in his expression walls coming down that she hadn't even realized were there. "Rachel," her phone rang. The chairman again. She sent it to voicemail, but it rang again immediately. Then again. "You should answer that." "Oh," Jake said. "No, tonight's about Rachel. Answer it." She did, and Richard's panicked voice filled her ear. "The Japanese are pulling out. The whole Sakamoto deal dead. They're flying back tonight unless someone stops them. The Sakamoto acquisition, 3 years in the making, the cornerstone of their Asian expansion. Without it, stock prices would crater." "I have to go," she told Jake, hating herself for it. It's important. I understand." And she could see he did, even if he was disappointed. "Let me drive you home." "I'll take the subway. You need to go." "Jake." He kissed her. Soft brief a promise more than passion. "Go save your empire. We'll be here when you're done." She wanted to stay. Wanted to tell Richard Blackstone to handle his own crisis for once. But 3,000 employees depended on the Sakamoto deal. Their jobs, their families, their futures hung in the balance. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. This is who you are. It's part of what makes you remarkable." Rachel kissed him again harder, trying to memorize the feeling. Then she ran for her car, already calling her team, switching from woman to warrior in the space of a breath. She spent the next 18 hours in crisis mode, flying to Los Angeles to meet the Japanese delegation at their hotel, negotiating through translators and cultural barriers and corporate brinksmanship. She saved the deal by offering personal guarantees that went beyond any reasonable risk, betting her own fortune on success. When she finally returned to New York Sunday night, exhausted and triumphant, she found a text from Jake. "Ellie wants to know if you can come to her school play Thursday. No pressure." Rachel stared at the message, at the simple invitation that somehow meant more than any corporate victory. She thought about Jake kissing her on that Brooklyn street, about his understanding when she had to leave, about his faith that she'd come back. "Wouldn't miss it," she typed back. Thursday came faster than expected. Rachel cleared her afternoon, ignoring Diane's increasingly frantic protests about missed meetings and postponed calls. She arrived at PS 118 in Queens 30 minutes early, finding Jake saving seats in the crowded auditorium. "You came," he said, and she heard surprise underneath the pleasure. "I said I would." People say a lot of things. Rachel thought about all the promises made in boardrooms, all the contracts broken when convenient. I'm not people. The play was objectively terrible fourth graders stumbling through Shakespeare, forgetting lines, missing cues. Ellie played Puck with an intensity that suggested she was performing on Broadway rather than in a school cafeteria that doubled as an auditorium. Rachel found herself cheering louder than anyone except Jake. Afterward, Ellie bounded over, still in her costume of leaves and glitter. "You came. Did you see the part where I made Bottom fall in love with Titania?" "You were brilliant," Rachel said, meaning it. Dad cried. "I did not cry." "You totally cried. Mrs. Rodriguez saw you." Jake's embarrassment was adorable. Rachel wanted to kiss him right there in front of the PTA and fourth grade fairies and everyone. "Celebration dinner?" she suggested instead. "My treat. Pizza," Ellie declared. "Sal's has the best pizza." Sal's was a hole in the wall that looked like a health code violation waiting to happen, but the pizza was transcendent. They sat in a cracked vinyl booth, Ellie recounting every moment of the play between bites. Jake watching his daughter with pure love, Rachel feeling like she'd somehow slipped into someone else's life, someone better's life. "I have to go to the bathroom," Ellie announced, then stage whispered to Rachel, "Make sure Dad doesn't eat my last slice." When she was gone, Jake reached across the table for Rachel's hand. "Thank you for coming. It meant the world to her." "Just to her?" "You know it didn't." They sat there holding hands over a greasy pizza box, and Rachel thought it might be the most romantic moment of her life. "I want this," she said suddenly. "Whatever this is, I want it." Jake squeezed her hand. "It's complicated. You're you, I'm me. Different worlds. So we'll build a bridge." "That's simple. Nothing's simple. But maybe that's okay." Ellie returned, saw them holding hands, and grinned. Finally, Mrs. Chen is going to be so disappointed about her niece. Over the next weeks, they found a rhythm. Rachel would come to Queens for dinner, helping with homework, while Jake cooked. Jake would sometimes meet her for lunch in Manhattan, looking endearingly out of place among the power suits. Ellie decided Rachel was her special friend, which seemed to cover whatever was happening between the adults without requiring definition. But realities had a way of intruding. Rachel's world didn't understand Jake, and his didn't trust hers. "He's a busboy," Richard Blackstone said when he found out. "Jesus, Rachel, I thought you had standards." "He's a Marine veteran and a single father." "He's a nobody. You're Rachel Bennett. This is beneath you." She wanted to argue to defend Jake's honor, but she knew it would only fuel Richard's disdain. Instead, she simply said, "My personal life isn't up for discussion." But it was constantly. Every society event she attended alone prompted questions. Every tabloid photographer who caught her in Queens sparked rumors. The board started asking if her distraction was affecting her judgment. Meanwhile, Jake faced his own pressures. The other servers at the Crystal Garden treated him differently now, with a mixture of awe and resentment. Some assumed he was using Rachel, others that she was using him. Marcus tried to promote him to management, not from merit, but from association. "I don't want charity," Jake told Rachel after refusing the promotion for the third time. "It's not charity. Marcus says you're the best busboy, not the best manager. There's a difference." His pride was admirable and infuriating in equal measure. Rachel wanted to make his life easier, but Jake needed to earn everything himself. The breaking point came, as it always did, from an unexpected direction. Max Langston arrived at Rachel's office on a Tuesday morning, unannounced and uninvited, the way he'd done everything since they'd known each other at Harvard Business School. He still looked like the golden boy he'd been, then perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect suit that cost more than most people's cars. "Hello, Rachel," he said, settling into her office chair like he owned it. "Heard you've been slumming in Queens." Rachel's blood chilled. Max didn't make social calls. He was CEO of Titan Industries, her biggest competitor, and if he was here, it meant trouble. "What do you want, Max?" "Direct as always. I've missed that about you." He pulled out his phone, swiped through photos. "Jake Walker. Interesting choice. Marine single father, makes $40,000 a year if he's lucky. Not exactly your usual type." "My personal life is none of your business." "Everything's business, Rachel. You taught me that." Max walked to her window with its view of Manhattan. "I'm here with a proposition. Titan wants to acquire Bennett Industries. Friendly merger, you stay on as president, everyone wins." "Go to hell." "I thought you'd say that, which is why I did some research on your new boyfriend." He placed a folder on her desk. "Did you know his wife's death wasn't exactly an accident?" Rachel's hands clenched. "Sarah Walker was killed by a drunk driver." "True. But did you know the drunk driver was Marcus Evans, former Marine, served with Jake in Iraq? Did you know Jake had been drinking with him earlier that night, let him drive home knowing he was wasted?" "You're lying." "Court records don't lie." Jake testified at the trial. Admitted he knew Evans had been drinking, thought he'd sobered up enough. Evans got vehicular manslaughter, Jake got survivor's guilt and a dead wife. Rachel opened the folder despite herself. Police reports, trial transcripts. Jake's testimony admitting he'd been with Evans at a bar that he'd made the judgment call that Evans was okay to drive. The timestamp showed Evans hit Sarah's car 90 minutes later. "This proves nothing," Rachel said, but her voice shook. "It proves Jake Walker's judgment cost his wife her life. Imagine what the media would do with this. War hero lets buddy drive drunk, buddy kills hero's wife. The irony alone would feed the tabloids for months." "You wouldn't." "I would, unless you reconsider my offer. You have 48 hours. Max headed for the door, then paused. "He seems like a good man, Rachel. Shame about his past. But everyone has secrets, don't they?" After Max left, Rachel sat staring at the folder. She knew she should destroy it, knew Max was manipulating her, but the questions gnawed at her. Did Jake blame himself for Sarah's death? Is that why he'd really left the Marines? Was his entire life now just penance for one terrible decision? That night she went to Queens as planned, but everything felt different. Jake noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked while Ellie was in her room doing homework. "Nothing. Long day." Jake studied her with those eyes that missed nothing. "Rachel talked to me." She wanted to. Wanted to ask him about that night, about Evans, about the guilt he must carry. But looking at him standing in his small kitchen, making Ellie's lunch for tomorrow with careful precision, she couldn't. Just corporate drama, nothing important. But Jake knew she was lying. She could see it in the way he withdrew slightly, the careful distance he maintained the rest of the evening. When she left, his goodbye was formal, polite, wrong. The next morning, Rachel called her head of security. "I need everything on Marcus Evans, former Marine, currently in federal prison for vehicular manslaughter." The report came back in 2 hours. Everything Max had said was true, but there was more. Evans had been struggling with PTSD, self-medicating with alcohol. Jake had been trying to help him, had been the only one from their unit who stayed in touch after discharge. The night of the accident, Jake had spent 4 hours trying to sober Evans up, had even taken his keys initially. But Evans had convinced him he was fine, had another set of keys, and left while Jake was in the bathroom. The accident happened on the expressway. Sarah Walker had been driving home from parent-teacher conferences, killed instantly when Evans crossed the median. Jake had been the one to identify her body. Rachel thought about Jake's quiet strength, his determination to be present for Ellie, his refusal to take shortcuts or accept charity. It all made sense now. He was a man trying to earn redemption one day at a time, one small act of service at a time. That afternoon, Max called. 48 hours, Rachel. What's it going to be?" "I need more time." "No. Decide now or I go public with Walker's story. Imagine little Ellie reading about how Daddy let the man who killed Mommy drive drunk." Rachel hung up on him. She stood at her office window looking out at the city she'd conquered and made a decision. Not as CEO of Bennett Industries, but as Rachel. She drove to Queens, arriving just as Jake was leaving for his shift. He stopped when he saw her confusion clear on his face. "Rachel, I thought you had meetings." "Marcus Evans," she said simply. Jake went completely still. The color drained from his face, and for a moment she thought he might collapse. Then his training kicked in, that Marine steel that had carried him through war zones and widowhood. "Who told you he—" "Max Langston. He's trying to blackmail me with it." Jake laughed, bitter and short. "Of course he is." He sat down on the steps of his building, suddenly looking older than his years. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." So he told her. About Evans, brilliant and brave and broken by too many tours. About the drinking that started as unit bonding and became Evans's only way to sleep. About the night Jake had tried everything to keep his brother in arms from driving but failed. "I should have tackled him," Jake said, staring at his hands. "Should have physically stopped him, but I thought I'd helped enough. He seemed coherent, promised he'd take a cab. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it? I knew he was struggling, knew he was drinking too much. I could have done more earlier, could have forced him into treatment, could have been a better friend." "Jake, Sarah died because I failed to act. Everything since then, everything I do, it's just trying to balance that scale. But it never balances, does it? She's still gone. Ellie still grows up without her mother, and I still wake up every night thinking about what I should have done differently." Rachel sat beside him, took his hand. You're human. You made a human decision with imperfect information. That's not the same as being responsible. Tell that to Ellie when she's old enough to understand. Does she know? Not the details. Someday when she asks, I'll tell her and hope she can forgive me. They sat in silence for a moment, then Jake asked, What does Langston want? My company. He's threatening to make the story public if I don't sell. Jake absorbed this, then stood. Then you sell. What? You sell. Your company isn't worth Ellie going through that trauma. Nothing is. Jake, we're talking about $1 billion enterprise, thousands of jobs. And I'm talking about my daughter. There's no comparison. Rachel stood too, anger flaring. So you just give up. Let him win. It's not about winning. It's about protecting what matters. Everything matters. The company matters. Those jobs matter. Standing up to bullies matters, not more than Ellie. I'm not saying more than Ellie. I'm saying there has to be another way. There is, Jake said quietly. We end this, you and me. Langston has no leverage if we're not together. Rachel felt like she'd been punched. You're breaking up with me. I'm protecting you, and Ellie, it's what I do. That's bullshit. You're running. Maybe, but sometimes running is the smart play. Since when do Marines run? Jake's jaw tightened. Since they have 9-year-old daughters who've already lost one parent to their father's mistakes. Before Rachel could respond, Ellie appeared in the doorway. Dad, Rachel, why are you yelling? We're not yelling, baby. Jake said, his voice immediately gentle. Rachel was just leaving. But she just got here. We were going to make tacos. Not tonight. Ellie looked between them, too smart to miss the tension. Are you fighting because of me? No, Rachel said quickly. Never because of you. Then why? Jake knelt beside his daughter. Sometimes adults have complicated problems. It's nothing for you to worry about. But Rachel's your special friend. My special friend, too. I know, baby, but I'm still your friend, Rachel interrupted. That doesn't change. Sometimes friends just need space. Ellie studied her with those serious eyes so like her father's. Then she hugged Rachel fierce and sudden. I love you, she whispered. Rachel's heart shattered. I love you too, sweetheart. She left without looking at Jake, drove 3 blocks before she had to pull over because she couldn't see through the tears. Her phone rang Max again. She sent it to voicemail, then called her lawyer. Tom, I need you to set up a meeting. Completely off the books. The meeting happened at a small law office in Brooklyn neutral territory. Max arrived confident, already calculating his victory. He didn't notice the recording equipment, the stenographer, the witnesses Rachel had arranged. Let me be clear, Rachel said once everyone was seated. You're attempting to blackmail me using information about Jake Walker's past to force the sale of my company. Max laughed. Blackmail is such an ugly word. I prefer strategic negotiation. Call it whatever you want. Here's my counteroffer. Rachel pulled out her own folder. 3 years ago, you insider traded on the Pellman acquisition. I have the emails, the trail of shell companies, the SEC violations that would put you in federal prison for a decade. Max's smile vanished. You're bluffing. Lisa Hernandez, your former CFO. Amazing what people will share when they're properly motivated. She kept everything Max. Every illegal trade, every cooked book, every bribe to regulatory officials. That's she signed an NDA, which becomes void in cases of criminal activity. You taught me that. Remember Harvard, second-year business ethics. Ironic, really. Max stood. You can't prove anything. I don't have to. The SEC will do that. Unless, of course, you disappear. Resign from Titan, leave the country. Never contact me or anyone I care about again. You're destroying me over some busboy. Rachel stood too, and for the first time in their long rivalry, Max actually stepped back from the fury in her eyes. I'm giving you a choice, the same kind you tried to give me, except mine comes with a plane ticket to a non-extradition country and a 24-hour head start. Max looked around the room at the lawyers, the witnesses, the evidence Rachel had accumulated. She watched him calculate odds, probabilities, outcomes, saw the moment he realized he'd lost. You've changed, he said finally. No, I've just remembered what's worth fighting for. Max left without another word. Within 6 hours, news broke that he'd resigned from Titan for personal reasons, boarding a flight to Switzerland where he supposedly had family interests. Rachel knew he'd never return. She drove to Queens that night, not sure if Jake would even answer the door. He did, looking exhausted, defeated in a way she'd never seen him. "Max is gone," she said simply. "He won't bother us again." "Rachel, I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that Ellie's safe. The story stays buried." Jake sagged against the doorframe. "How?" "I outmaneuvered him. It's what I do." "What did it cost you?" "Nothing that matters." They stood there, the space between them feeling like miles. Finally, Jake said, "I'm sorry for pushing you away, for not trusting you to handle it." "You were protecting your daughter." "I was protecting myself too. From hoping, from believing someone like you could actually want someone like me long term." "Someone like you? You mean someone brave, loyal, dedicated. Someone who stands up for others even when it costs him. Someone who makes me laugh, makes me think, makes me want to be better than I am." "Someone broken," Jake said quietly. "Someone whose best friend killed his wife. Someone who busses tables and can barely make rent." Rachel stepped closer. "Someone who loves his daughter more than life. Someone who serves others not for glory, but because it's right. Someone who makes me feel more like myself than I've ever been." "Rachel, I love you." She said the words coming out in a rush. "I love you, and I love Ellie, and I love the life you've built, even if it doesn't make sense with mine. We can figure out the rest." Jake looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. The kiss was different from their first desperate, grateful promise that this time they wouldn't let go easily. "Gross," Ellie's voice came from inside. "But also, finally." They broke apart laughing. Ellie stood in the doorway, grinning. "Does this mean we can make tacos now?" she asked. They made tacos, the three of them crowded in the small kitchen, and Rachel thought it was better than any 5-star restaurant she'd ever eaten in. After Ellie went to bed, she and Jake sat on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. "This isn't going to be easy," Jake said. "Your world and mine. We'll make our own world, somewhere between Manhattan and Queens, between boardrooms and school plays. The board will hate it. Let them. I own 51% of the company. They can hate it quietly." Jake laughed, soft and warm. "You really are remarkable." "So are you." They sat in comfortable silence. Then Jake said, "I need to tell you something. About Evans, about that night." "You don't have to I do. If we're doing this, really doing this, you need to know everything." So he told her the parts he'd left out. How Evans had called him 6 times that night before Jake finally agreed to meet him. How Jake had been planning to propose to Sarah the next day, had the ring in his pocket. How he'd been so focused on his own happiness that he'd missed how desperate Evans was. How Sarah had been driving his car that night because hers was in the shop, and if he'd just picked her up like he'd originally planned, she'd have been nowhere near that highway. "The what-ifs will kill you," Rachel said when he finished. "They nearly did. First year after I thought about eating my gun more nights than not. Only thing that stopped me was Ellie. She needed me even if I didn't deserve her. Jake, I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you so you understand. The Jake Walker you met, the one who stepped between you and those fighters, he exists because Sarah died. Because I decided that if I couldn't save her, I'd save everyone else I could. Every drunk I pour into a cab, every kid I help with homework at the community center, every person I stand up for, it's all penance." "Maybe it started as penance," Rachel said carefully. "But somewhere along the way, it became who you are. Not because you're punishing yourself, but because you're good. You see me through rose-colored glasses. I see you clearly, the damage and the strength, the guilt and the grace. I see all of it, and I love all of it." Jake turned to look at her, and she saw tears in his eyes for the first time. "I don't deserve you." "Deserve is a stupid word. We don't deserve anything. We just get what we get and make the best of it." Very philosophical for a corporate shark. "I have depths." He kissed her temple. "You do. God help me, you do." Over the next weeks, they found a new rhythm. Rachel still worked insane hours, but she carved out inviolable time for Jake and Ellie. Jake still refused anything that looked like charity, but he let Rachel help in small ways, picking Ellie up when he worked late, covering the occasional grocery run, being present in ways that mattered more than money. The Crystal Garden staff got used to seeing Rachel there, not as a customer, but as Jake's girlfriend, sometimes helping during rush periods, just for the excuse to be near him. She was terrible at it, spilled more drinks than she served, mixed up orders constantly. But Jake would watch her with such affection that Marcus didn't have the heart to ban her from the floor. "You know you're costing me money," Marcus told Jake one night after Rachel had accidentally given away a $300 bottle of wine as the house read. "I'll cover it. With what your good looks, with my overtime, which you're going to give me because you're desperate for good help, and I'm the best you've got." Marcus grumbled, but agreed. He'd grown protective of Jake and Rachel's unlikely romance, even started a pool among the staff, on when Jake would propose. Jake knew about the pool. There were no secrets in restaurant work, but said nothing. He was in fact thinking about it. Not marriage necessarily, but the future, how to blend their worlds more permanently. The ring his grandmother had left him sat in a safety deposit box in Queens waiting. But there were practical considerations. Where would they live? How would Ellie handle the change? What would happen when the media inevitably got hold of their story? That last question answered itself on a rainy Thursday in April. Rachel arrived at Jake's apartment to find him standing at the window, jaw tight with the kind of tension she recognized from their early days. "What's wrong?" He handed her a tablet showing a gossip site. The headline screamed, "Beauty and the Busboy, How Rachel Bennett Fell for a Nobody." The article was worse than the headline. It painted Jake as a gold digger, Rachel as desperate, their relationship as a transaction. There were quotes from anonymous sources at the Crystal Garden, from members of Rachel's board, from people who claimed to know Jake from the neighborhood. Most of it was lies, but threaded through were enough facts to make it credible. "Ellie hasn't seen it yet," Jake said quietly. "But kids at school will, their parents will. We'll sue them. I'll bury them in litigation. And make it worse, give them more to write about." Jake shook his head. "This is what I was afraid of. Not for me, for her. She doesn't deserve this." Before Rachel could respond, Ellie came home from school, backpack dragging, eyes red. She went straight to her room without a word. "Ellie." Jake knocked on her door. "Baby, what happened?" "Go away." Jake looked at Rachel, helpless. She'd never seen him look lost before, but his daughter's pain undid him in ways nothing else could. "Let me," Rachel said. She knocked softly. "Ellie? It's Rachel. Can I come in?" "Are you really just using my dad?" Ellie's voice was small, muffled by what sounded like a pillow. "No, sweetheart. Never." "Then why did Emma's mom say you were—" "She said Dad wasn't good enough for you, that you'd dump him soon." Rachel's hands clenched. She wanted to find Emma's mom and explain exactly what she thought of people who hurt children to make themselves feel important. Instead, she said, "Can I come in and talk about it?" The door opened slowly. Ellie stood there in her school uniform, face blotchy from crying. Rachel's heart broke. "People are mean sometimes," Rachel said, sitting on Ellie's bed. "When they see something good, something that makes them feel small, they try to tear it down. But why? Because they're scared or jealous or just small inside." Rachel pulled Ellie close. "What Emma's mom doesn't understand is that your dad is the best man I've ever met. He's brave and kind and puts you first always. That makes him worth more than all the money in my bank account." "Really? Really? You know what I was before I met your dad? Successful but lonely. Rich but empty. Your dad and you filled up parts of me I didn't even know were hollow." Ellie sniffled. "Emma said you'd leave us when you got bored." "Emma's wrong. I'm never bored with you two. You're my favorite people in the world. More than your company. More than anything." Ellie was quiet for a moment, then said, "I hate that people are mean about Dad. He works so hard, does everything for me. Why isn't that enough for them?" Rachel didn't have a good answer for that, so she just held Ellie tighter. Jake stood in the doorway, watching them. His daughter curled into Rachel's arms and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This woman who commanded boardrooms and bent corporations to her will was sitting on his daughter's twin bed, holding his little girl while she cried about mean kids at school. The contrast should have been jarring, but instead it felt right, like pieces clicking into place. "Dad?" Ellie looked up at him. "Are you mad?" "Never at you, baby. Come here." Ellie launched herself into his arms, and he held her tight, meeting Rachel's eyes over his daughter's head. There was something fierce in Rachel's expression, protective in a way that made his heart race. "We're going to be okay," he told Ellie. "All of us. The people who matter know the truth. But everyone at school will find something else to gossip about next week. That's how these things work." That night, after Ellie was asleep, Jake and Rachel sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open to the gossip site. The comments section was brutal, dissecting everything from Jake's appearance to his worthiness as a father. "I could buy the site," Rachel said quietly. "Shut it down. And prove them right, that you have to protect me because I can't protect myself. That's not what I know, but that's how it would look." Jake closed the laptop. "This is part of it being with you. I understood that going in." Understanding and living it are different things, especially when it affects Ellie. Jake reached across the table, took her hands. "You know what Ellie said to me while you were in the bathroom? She said seeing you stand up to bullies makes her want to be brave too. You're teaching her something I can't, that success doesn't mean compromising who you are." "Jake, I mean it. Yes, this is hard. Yes, I hate that she's hurting. But you're showing her what it looks like to be a strong woman in a world that tries to tear strong women down. That's worth some gossip site nastiness." Rachel squeezed his hands. "How are you so wise?" "Not wise, just had a lot of time to think about what matters while other people were shooting at me." The next morning, Rachel walked into her board meeting with steel in her spine. Richard Blackstone had called an emergency session, and she knew exactly what it was about. "This has gone too far," Richard said before she even sat down. "The gossip, the pictures now, this article. You're making the company look foolish." "I'm making the company look human," Rachel countered. "Our Q1 profits are up 18%. Our Asian expansion is ahead of schedule. The Sakamoto deal alone will net us. None of that matters if our CEO is a laughingstock." "I'm not a laughingstock. I'm a woman in a relationship. If that threatens you, Richard, perhaps you should examine why." "Oh, don't make this about gender." "Then what's it about?" "My personal life doesn't affect my performance. It affects perception. Investors are asking questions." "Let them ask. Our numbers speak for themselves." Richard leaned forward. "The board has concerns, serious concerns. We're suggesting you take a sabbatical. Let things cool down." Rachel looked around the table at 12 faces she'd made wealthy beyond imagination. Half wouldn't meet her eyes. The other half watched with the hunger of scavengers sensing weakness. "A sabbatical," she repeated. "Voluntary, I assume. For now." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Rachel stood gathering her materials with deliberate calm. "Gentlemen, ladies, let me be perfectly clear. I built this company from nothing. I've made every person in this room rich enough to buy small countries. If you think you can push me out because you disapprove of who I love, you're welcome to try. But I promise you this, the litigation will be public brutal, and I will win. I always win." She walked out, leaving silence in her wake. Her phone was ringing before she reached the elevator. Diane panicked. "They're calling an investor meeting," her assistant said. "Richard's trying to build a coalition. Let him. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning." "What are you going to announce?" "The truth." Rachel had never been one for public emotion, but standing at that podium the next morning, looking out at a sea of reporters, she let herself be vulnerable. "There's been speculation about my personal life," she began. "So let me address it directly. Yes, I'm in a relationship with Jake Walker. Yes, he works as a server. Yes, he's a single father. These facts seem to fascinate people who believe wealth and worth are synonymous." She paused, finding her rhythm. Jake Walker served 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. He earned a Bronze Star for pulling 4 Marines from a burning vehicle under enemy fire. He came home to raise his daughter alone after his wife's death. He works an honest job to support his family and volunteers at a community center teaching kids to read. If that makes him unworthy in your eyes, Then your values need examining, not mine. Ms. Bennett, a reporter called out, how do you respond to claims that this relationship is a publicity stunt? By pointing out that I've spent my entire career avoiding publicity about my personal life. If I wanted a stunt, I'd date another CEO or a celebrity, not a man who actively avoids attention. What about the board's concerns? The board is paid to concern itself with profits, not my personal life. As long as I deliver the former, the latter is irrelevant. Is it true you're facing a coup? Rachel smiled sharp as a blade. Anyone who wants my job is welcome to try to take it. But they should remember I don't lose. The press conference changed the narrative. Suddenly, Jake wasn't just a busboy, but a war hero. Rachel wasn't desperate, but defiant. The romance wasn't a transaction, but a triumph of love over class boundaries. The media loved a good redemption story almost as much as they loved tearing people down. But the damage to Jake's daily life was already done. Parents at Ellie's school whispered when he dropped her off. Customers at the Crystal Garden asked for photos, treated him like a celebrity or a curiosity. The quiet life he'd built was crumbling. We could move, Rachel suggested one evening. They were at her penthouse for once, Ellie doing homework at the dining table that cost more than Jake's annual salary. Where? Jake asked. Anywhere. Different neighborhood, different school, fresh start. Running doesn't solve anything. Besides, Ellie loves her school, her friends. I won't uproot her because some adults are assholes. Then what do we do? Jake was quiet for a moment, watching his daughter work. We endure. We show her that good people don't fold under pressure. We teach her that love is worth fighting for even when the fight gets ugly. Very philosophical for a Marine. We're not all jarheads, he said with a slight smile. Some of us can read. That weekend they attended Ellie's school fair together, a united front against the whispers and stares. Rachel threw herself into it with her usual intensity, manning the ring toss booth like it was a Fortune 500 merger. Jake watched her convince kids to spend their tickets trying to win goldfish they didn't really want, using the same skills that had built her empire. Your girlfriend's intense, Marcus said, appearing beside Jake with a corn dog. What are you doing here? Supporting the cause. Also, Linda from Day Shift has a kid here. Marcus watched Rachel high-five a 6-year-old who'd finally won a prize. She's good with kids. She's good with everyone when she lets herself be. You thinking about giving her some of her own? Jake nearly choked on his lemonade. Jesus, Marcus. What? You're not getting younger. Neither is she. If you're going to do the whole family thing. We haven't even talked about marriage. But you've thought about it. Jake didn't answer, but Marcus saw the truth in his silence. There's a ring, isn't there? Marcus grinned. You've got a ring. It was my grandmother's. And you're waiting for what divine intervention? The right moment. Brother, the right moment is when you realize you can't imagine life without her. From where I'm standing, you passed that point months ago. Before Jake could respond, a commotion erupted near the dunk tank. Emma's mother, the one who'd made Ellie cry, was loudly complaining about something her voice carrying across the fairground. It's inappropriate, she was saying to a group of parents. What kind of message does it send to our children when the school allows that kind of relationship to be flaunted? Rachel started toward her, but Jake caught her arm. Don't. She's not worth it. She hurt Ellie, and confronting her will only make it worse. But Ellie had heard too. She walked up to Emma's mother with the dignity of someone much older than 9 and said clearly, My dad is a hero and Rachel makes him happy. If you have a problem with that, it's your problem, not ours. The fairground went silent. Emma's mother, flushed red, opened her mouth, then closed it when she saw dozens of people watching. She grabbed Emma's hand and stalked off. That's my girl, Jake said quietly, pride evident in every word. Our girl, Rachel corrected, then froze when she realized what she'd said. Jake looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her close and kissed her right there in front of the entire school fair. When they broke apart, someone started clapping, then someone else. Soon half the fairground was applauding, while the other half looked scandalized. So much for keeping a low profile, Rachel murmured against his lips. Some things are worth being loud about. That night after Ellie was asleep, Jake found the ring in its safety deposit box. It was simple, classic, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, nothing like the massive rocks Rachel's peers wore, but somehow perfect for her. His grandmother had worn it for 60 years of marriage, through the Depression, a world war, and everything that came after. He was still staring at it when his phone rang. Unknown number. Jake Walker. Speaking. Mr. Walker, this is James Patterson from the Washington Post. I'm doing a story on Rachel Bennett and her relationship with you. I was wondering if you'd comment on your service record. No comment. What about the circumstances surrounding your wife's death? There are rumors. Jake hung up. The phone immediately rang again. Different number, same questions. He turned it off, but the damage was done. They were digging, and eventually they'd find what Max Langston had found. The story would come out, and Ellie would learn the truth in the worst possible way. He called Rachel. We need to talk. She was there in 20 minutes, having broken several traffic laws. Jake had the folder Max had compiled spread on his kitchen table. They're going to find this, he said. The Evans connection, my role in it. We need to get ahead of it. How? I tell Ellie first. Everything, then we go public with it ourselves. Control the narrative. Rachel saw what that would cost him, the pain of laying his guilt bare for the world to judge. There has to be another way. There isn't. I won't let her be blindsided by this. They told Ellie the next morning, sitting in Central Park on a bench overlooking the reservoir. Jake explained about Evans, about that night, about the choices he'd made and their consequences. Ellie listened with that intense focus she brought to everything important. So Mom died because your friend was drunk? She asked when he finished. Yes. And you tried to stop him? I did, but not hard enough. Ellie was quiet for a long time, processing. Rachel held her breath, watching this little girl grapple with information that would reshape her understanding of everything. You made a mistake, Ellie finally said. A big one. The biggest. But you didn't kill Mom. Mr. Evans did. I could have prevented it. Maybe. Or maybe he would have driven anyway just later. Maybe he would have hit someone else's mom. Ellie looked up at her father with eyes too wise for her age. You can't know what would have happened. You can only know what did. Jake pulled his daughter close, tears streaming down his face. When did you get so smart? I had a good teacher. Rachel watched them hold each other and thought about family. Not the one you're born into, but the one you choose. She'd chosen these two complicated, beautiful people, and they'd chosen her back. Whatever came next, that was enough. The story broke 2 days later, but not the way they'd feared. A veterans organization had learned about the media's digging and released their own statement defending Jake and condemning the invasion of privacy. Other Marines from his unit came forward with stories of his heroism, his dedication, the lives he'd saved. The narrative became not about his failure, but about the impossible choices veterans face and the weight they carry home. You did this, Jake said to Rachel after reading the latest article. I made some calls. You have more friends than you know. Rachel, you've been fighting alone for too long. Let people fight for you sometimes. That evening, Richard Blackstone called Rachel. The board has reconsidered. Your personal life is your business. We apologize for overstepping. What changed? Public opinion. Turns out people like a love story, especially one with a war hero. Our stock is up 3 points just from the positive press. Rachel wanted to tell him what he could do with his apology, but she was too good a businesswoman to burn bridges unnecessarily. I appreciate the board's position. There is one thing, though. Several major investors want to meet Jake. They're curious about the man who captured Rachel Bennett. He's not a circus attraction. No, but he's part of your life now, which makes him part of the company's image. Like it or not, that's reality. After she hung up, Rachel found Jake in his kitchen making dinner with Ellie. They moved around each other with practiced ease, Ellie chattering about school, while Jake listened with his full attention. This was what Richard and the board would never understand: the value of ordinary moments of presence over profit. Stay, Jake said when he saw her. Not a question, just a simple statement of want. Always, she replied, and meant it. After dinner, while Ellie did homework, Jake pulled Rachel onto the fire escape. The spring evening was warm, the city sprawling before them in a glitter of lights and possibility. The board wants to meet you, Rachel said. Hard pass, and Jake, I'm not going to parade around for their approval. They either accept us or they don't. It's not that simple. These people they control your company, not your life, not unless you let them. Jake turned to face her. You've spent so much time fighting for their approval, their respect. When do you stop fighting and just live? I don't know how to stop fighting. It's all I know. Then learn, with me, with Ellie. He pulled the ring box from his pocket, and Rachel's breath caught. I'm not good at speeches. Words were never my strong suit, but I know this: you make me want to be more than I am. You make Ellie dream bigger than I ever could alone. You make our small life feel infinite. He opened the box, revealing his grandmother's ring. I can't offer you wealth or status or any of the things your world values. All I can offer is this: a promise to stand beside you, to raise Ellie with you, to build something real and lasting in a world full of temporary things. Marry me, Rachel. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just Rachel. Marry us. Rachel looked at the ring, modest by her world's standards, but perfect in its simplicity. She thought about boardrooms and battles, about profit and loss, about everything she'd built and everything she'd sacrificed to build it. Then she looked at Jake, this quiet warrior who'd shown her what courage really meant, who'd given her a family when she'd only known ambition. Yes, she said, and the word felt like freedom. Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. They kissed on that fire escape while the city bustled below, oblivious to the small miracle happening 5 stories up. Gross! Ellie's voice came from inside, but she was grinning when they looked. Does this mean Rachel's going to be my mom? The question hung in the air, complicated and precious. Rachel looked at Jake, who nodded. If you want me to be, Rachel said carefully. Ellie considered this with her usual seriousness. You're not my first mom. She'll always be that. But you can be my second mom. My chosen mom. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I would be honored to be your chosen mom. Ellie hugged them both, and they stood there on that fire escape, a family forged not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the decision to stand together against whatever came next. The engagement news would break tomorrow, would send ripples through both their worlds. There would be challenges, compromises, probably more gossip and judgment. But tonight, in this moment, they were just 3 people who'd found each other against all odds and decided that was enough. We should go inside, Jake said eventually. Homework doesn't do itself. Can we have ice cream after? Ellie asked. It's a school night. But we're celebrating. Jake looked at Rachel, who was trying not to laugh at Ellie's negotiation tactics. Small bowls, he conceded. Medium bowls, Ellie countered. Deal. They went inside, leaving the fire escape to the spring evening and the city lights. In the morning, everything would change, but tonight they were home. The next morning arrived with a media frenzy that made previous coverage look tame. Rachel's engagement to Jake was front-page news in the business section, the lifestyle section, and every gossip blog in existence. The ring was analyzed. Their relationship dissected, think pieces written about love across class lines. America's Cinderella story sats. One headline read, which made Jake laugh. If anyone's Cinderella here, it's me, he said, reading over Rachel's shoulder. You're clearly the prince. Princess, Ellie corrected. Or better, warrior queen, like in my book. Rachel's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Board members, investors, friends. She hadn't talked to in years, all wanting details, wanting to understand how Rachel Bennett, corporate killer, had fallen for a server from Queens. Turn it off, Jake suggested. The world can wait one day. But Rachel was already checking emails, already strategizing. The Nikkei is down 2% on uncertainty about how this affects leadership. Jake took the phone from her hands. You need to breathe. The company survived before you. It'll survive one morning without you. That's not how it works. Then change how it works. They compromised. Rachel would handle critical calls for 1 hour. Then they'd spend the rest of the day as a family. It took 3 hours and 2 conference calls, but eventually Rachel powered down her devices. They went to Coney Island, of all places. Ellie's choice. Rachel, in her designer clothes, riding the Cyclone, screaming like a teenager while Jake laughed and Ellie demanded they go again. They ate Nathan's hot dogs and won rigged carnival games and watched the sun set over the Atlantic. This is perfect, Rachel said, Sandy. and sunburned and happier than she'd been in years. "This is normal," Jake corrected. "This is what normal people do." "Then I want to be normal." "Too late. You're marrying into weird." That night after Ellie was asleep, they started planning. Not the wedding that would come later, but their life. Where to live, how to blend their worlds, how to protect Ellie while letting her grow. "I'll sell the penthouse," Rachel offered. "We'll get something in between. Brooklyn maybe, or..." "No. Jake, your apartment is too small for 3 people." "I know. But you shouldn't have to give up everything. We'll find middle ground, but not by you sacrificing what you've earned." They debated, negotiated, compromised skills from their respective worlds, applied to building a shared future. They decided on a brownstone in Park Slope, good schools for Ellie, easy commute, for Rachel, community feel for Jake. Not Queens, not Manhattan, but something new for all of them. The wedding planning was more complicated. Rachel's world expected a spectacle St. Patrick's Cathedral reception at the Plaza Society pages and designer everything. Jake wanted family and close friends in someone's backyard. "We could elope," Rachel suggested after their 5th argument about guest lists. "Ellie would never forgive us." They found their compromise in the most unexpected place, the Crystal Garden itself. Marcus offered to close the restaurant for a day, and suddenly everything clicked. The place where they'd met, where Jake had stepped between Rachel and danger, where their impossible love story had begun. "It's perfect," Ellie declared when they told her. "Like a fairy tale, but real." The months leading to the wedding were a blur of controlled chaos. Rachel managed the logistics with corporate precision, while Jake handled the human elements, making sure his Marine brothers could attend, arranging care for elderly relatives, keeping Ellie grounded amid the excitement. Their worlds collided and merged in ways both beautiful and complicated. "My mother's coming," Rachel announced one evening, reading an email with obvious tension. "I thought your mother was, quote, dead to me." That was wishful thinking. Rachel set down her phone with excessive care. "Victoria Bennett has decided her daughter's wedding is worth gracing with her presence. First time she's acknowledged my existence in 3 years." Jake had heard fragments about Rachel's mother, the society matron, who'd viewed her daughter more as an accessory than a person who'd been furious when Rachel chose business over a suitable marriage to someone of their class. "What triggered the change?" Jake asked. "You did. Apparently marrying a war hero has social cash she can exploit. She's probably already planning how to spin this to her country club friends." The bitterness in Rachel's voice made Jake pull her close. "We can uninvite her. And give her ammunition about how I've become cruel and ungrateful? No. Let her come. Let her see that I built something real without her." Victoria Bennett arrived 2 weeks before the wedding, like a force of nature, perfectly coiffed, impeccably dressed, and radiating disapproval despite her practiced smile. She took one look at Jake's apartment and barely suppressed a shudder. "How quaint," she said, making the word sound like an insult. "It's home," Jake replied evenly, not rising to the bait. Victoria turned her laser focus on him. "You must be the soldier. Marine, actually, and you must be the mother who abandoned Rachel when she needed you most." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Rachel grabbed Jake's hand in warning, but he didn't back down. He'd faced enemy fire. One disapproving socialite didn't scare him. Victoria's smile turned sharp. "I see Rachel has been telling stories." "Just truths," Rachel interjected. "Jake, this is my mother, my fiancé, and your future son-in-law." "Yes, about that." Victoria examined Jake like he was a specimen. "I've had my lawyers look into you, Mr. Walker. Your record is admirable if one values that sort of thing. But surely you understand my concerns about this match." "What concerns would those be?" Jake's voice was dangerously soft. "The obvious disparities. Social, educational, financial." "You're right," Jake interrupted. "There are disparities. Rachel is brilliant, successful, and managed to become a good person despite having you for a mother. I'm just a man trying to be worthy of her. But here's the thing, she chose me anyway, and if you can't respect that choice, you're welcome to leave." Ellie, who'd been listening from her doorway, chose that moment to appear. "Are you my grandma?" Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "I suppose I am." "Cool. Do you want to see my science project? I built a volcano that actually erupts. Dad helped with the chemical reaction part, because he knows about explosives from the Marines." The look on Victoria's face as Ellie dragged her to see a baking soda volcano was almost worth the entire visit. Almost. "She's testing you," Rachel whispered to Jake. "This is what she does, pushes buttons until people break." "Then she's going to be disappointed. I don't break easy." But Victoria wasn't done. She spent the next week inserting herself into wedding planning, making subtle and not-so-subtle suggestions about everything from flowers to guest placement. The breaking point came when she cornered Rachel at the final dress fitting. "You can still call this off," Victoria said, watching Rachel in the mirror. "I know you think you love him, but love fades. Compatibility endures." "Like you and father were compatible." Rachel's voice was ice. "So compatible you haven't lived in the same house in 15 years. We understood each other. We maintained appearances." "Appearances?" Rachel turned to face her mother directly. "That's all you ever cared about. How things looked, not how they were." "Don't be naive. How things look matters in our world. Your world, not mine. I built my own world, mother. One where a man's worth isn't measured by his portfolio, but by his character. His character won't pay for Ellie's education or maintain your lifestyle when what? When I realize I've married beneath me. You know nothing about Jake, nothing about what he sacrificed, what he survived. That man has more strength in his little finger than anyone in your precious social circle." Victoria's expression turned pitying. "You're infatuated. It will pass, and when it does, you'll be trapped with a child that isn't yours and a husband who'll never understand the world you come from." Rachel felt something break inside her, but not in the way her mother intended. It was more like a chain snapping, a final severing of whatever hold Victoria had maintained. "Get out," Rachel said quietly. "Excuse me. Get out. You're uninvited from the wedding and from my life. I spent 34 years trying to earn your approval, your love. I'm done. Jake and Ellie give me more love in a day than you've given me in a lifetime." Victoria stood, gathering her dignity like armor. "You'll regret this." "The only thing I regret is waiting this long." After she left, Rachel stood in her wedding dress, shaking with rage and relief. The seamstress who'd witnessed everything quietly continued with adjustments, while Rachel composed herself. That evening, she told Jake what had happened. He listened without interrupting, then said, "I'm proud of you. For becoming an orphan by choice. For choosing the family that chooses you back." The wedding day dawned gray and drizzly, which Ellie declared was good luck despite no evidence supporting this claim. The crystal garden had been transformed, white flowers and soft lights turning the space ethereal. The guest list was eclectic, Rachel's board members mixing with Jake's Marine brothers, Ellie's classmates sitting next to Fortune 500 CEOs. Jake stood at the altar in his dress blues medals gleaming, looking simultaneously uncomfortable and magnificent. His best man, Tommy Chen from his unit, kept whispering jokes to keep him calm. "She could still run," Tommy said. "Rich girl realizes she's marrying a jarhead, makes a break for it." "She won't run," Jake said with quiet certainty. "How do you know?" "Because she never runs from anything. She just wins." The music started, and Ellie appeared first, scattering flower petals with scientific precision. Then Rachel emerged, and Jake forgot how to breathe. She'd chosen a simple dress, elegant rather than ostentatious, but it wasn't the dress that stopped his heart. It was the way she looked at him, like he was her whole world condensed into one person. The walk down the aisle felt both eternal and instant. Richard Blackstone gave her away, having stepped into the role when she'd mentioned not having anyone. "You've been more of a father to me than my real one," she'd told him, making the old corporate raider tear up. The ceremony was brief, personal. They'd written their own vows, which had seemed romantic until they were standing there trying to speak through emotion. "Jake," Rachel began, voice steady despite her tears, "you stood between me and danger before you even knew my name. You've been standing between me and my own worst impulses ever since. You showed me that strength isn't about conquest, but about service, that love isn't about possession, but about presence. I promise to stand beside you, to raise Ellie with you, to build a life that honors both where we came from and where we're going." Jake had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. "Rachel, you crashed into my carefully controlled life like a beautiful disaster. You made me want more than survival, made me believe I deserved more than penance. You gave Ellie a mother and me a partner. I promise to love you on your worst days and your best to support your dreams, even when I don't understand them, to be your anchor in storms and your sail in calm seas. And I promise, Ellie piped up, making everyone laugh, to teach you both how to be cool. The judge smiled. I think that covers everything. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake kissed Rachel like they were alone in the universe, like there wasn't a room full of people cheering and crying and celebrating the impossible made real. When they finally broke apart, Ellie wormed between them, making it a three-way hug that somehow felt more binding than any vows. The reception was controlled chaos. Marines teaching board members to do shots properly. Ellie's teacher discussing education policy with the Secretary of Commerce, Marcus, giving an increasingly emotional toast about love, finding a way. Rachel's world and Jake's world collided combined, created something entirely new. No regrets, Jake asked as they swayed to their first dance. One, Rachel admitted. His face fell. What? I wish we'd done this sooner. He spun her, making her laugh, and she thought this might be what happiness actually felt like. Not the sharp thrill of victory, but this warm certainty of home. The honeymoon was brief, 3 days in Montauk, while Ellie stayed with Marcus and his wife. It was the longest Jake had been away from his daughter since Sarah's death, and he called twice a day to check in. She's fine, Rachel assured him, pulling him back to bed. Marcus raised 3 kids. He can handle Ellie for 72 hours. I know, it's just, you're a dad first. I knew that when I married you. I love that about you. They spent their honeymoon walking beaches, eating at clam shacks, making love in a modest bed and breakfast that Jake had insisted on paying for with his own money. It wasn't the Maldives or Paris, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. I want to talk about something, Rachel said on their last morning, watching the sunrise from their balcony. That sounds ominous. Not ominous. Practical. She took a breath. I want to adopt Ellie. Officially. If she wants that, if you want that. Jake set down his coffee carefully. You've thought about this? Since the day she called me her chosen mom. I want it to be legal binding. If something happens to you, nothing's going to happen. Jake, you thought nothing would happen to Sarah either. Life doesn't give guarantees. Rachel took his hand. I love that little girl like she's mine. I want to protect her, provide for her, be there for her always. Let me do that officially. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Rachel worried she'd overstepped. Then he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. Yes, he whispered. God, yes. She'd have a real mother again. She has a real mother. Sarah will always be her mother. I just want to be her legal guardian, too. Another layer of protection and love. They told Ellie when they got home, all 3 of them squeezed onto the couch in what would soon be their former apartment. So you'd be my mom on paper, too? Ellie asked, processing. Only if you want that, Rachel said carefully. Would I call you Mom? You can call me whatever feels right. Rachel. Mom, hey you. Definitely not hey you, Ellie said with a giggle. Then more seriously, can I think about it? Of course. Ellie thought about it for exactly 1 day before presenting them with a PowerPoint presentation. Jake's influence showing in the tactical planning. Rachel's in the business framework. I've analyzed the situation, Ellie said seriously, advancing slides on Jake's laptop. The pros include legal protection, inheritance rights, and official family status. The cons are basically 0 unless Rachel turns out to be evil, which statistical analysis suggests is unlikely. Statistical analysis? Jake asked, trying not to laugh. I surveyed my class. 92% said Rachel seems nice. The other 8% are stupid. Ellie? Sorry. The other 8% have different opinions that I respect but disagree with. She clicked to the final slide, which just said yes in huge letters. I want Rachel to adopt me. The legal process took 3 months, complicated by bureaucracy and the unusual circumstances. But finally, on a rainy Tuesday in family court, it became official. Rachel Bennett Walker was now legally Ellie's mother. How does it feel? The judge asked Ellie. Like I won the lottery, but better because I got to choose my ticket, Ellie replied, making the judge laugh. They celebrated at Sal's Pizza, the same place they'd gone after Ellie's school play. Full circle, Jake thought, watching his wife and daughter debate whether pineapple on pizza was acceptable. Never, Ellie insisted. It's a crime against nature. It's sweet and savory, Rachel countered. Sophisticated palates appreciate the contrast. Sophisticated palates are weird. Your mom's weird, Jake said, then froze. It was the first time he'd called Rachel that without qualification. Ellie noticed, too. She looked at Rachel, then at Jake, then smiled. Yes, she is, but are kind of weird. Life settled into a new rhythm. They moved to the Park Slope brownstone, each claiming spaces that reflected their personalities. Jake's workshop in the basement. Rachel's home office on the second floor, Ellie's kingdom on the third. The commute to the Crystal Garden was longer, but Jake refused to quit. I need something that's mine, he explained when Rachel suggested he didn't need to work. The community center isn't enough. Jake had started volunteering more, teaching veterans job skills and kids basic self-defense. But it wasn't the same as earning his own wage, maintaining independence with independence. Rachel understood. She'd cut back her own hours a shock that had sent ripples through Wall Street, but she hadn't quit either. They were both people who needed purpose beyond family, which paradoxically made their family stronger. The test came 6 months after the wedding. Rachel's company had the opportunity for a massive acquisition, but it would require her to be in Tokyo for 3 weeks. Old Rachel would have gone without question. Wife and mother. Rachel hesitated. Go, Jake said when she told him. We'll be fine. 3 weeks is a long time. We survived my deployments. We can handle 3 weeks of video calls. That was before you became essential. You were always essential, Rachel. Now it's just official. She went and they were fine. Jake and Ellie sent daily videos, terrible cooking experiments, and homework help, and bedtime stories. Rachel negotiated during Tokyo days and lived for New York evenings when she could call home. Ms. Bennett Walker, her Japanese counterpart, said, during one dinner, you seem different from your reputation. Different how? Softer, more human. It's disconcerting but not unpleasant. I got married, had a family. It changes your perspective. Makes you weak, some would say. Some would be wrong. Having something worth fighting for makes you stronger. She closed the deal, the biggest of her career, but the victory felt hollow until she was home. Ellie talking her ear off about a school project while Jake made dinner. I miss this, she said, apropos of nothing. Missed what? Jake asked. This. The noise, the chaos, the life. Boardrooms are so quiet. You want noise? Ellie grinned mischievously. I could practice my violin. No, Jake and Rachel said in unison. Ellie had recently taken up violin with enthusiasm that far exceeded her skill. Fine, but I'm playing after dinner. God help us all, Jake muttered, but he was smiling. These were their days now, budget meetings and bake sales, hostile takeovers, and homework help, corporate warfare, and family dinners. 2 worlds that shouldn't fit, but somehow did held together by choice and commitment and love. One evening, Rachel came home to find Jake on the brownstone's front steps, still in his Crystal Garden uniform, just sitting. Bad day, she asked, settling beside him. Got an offer today. Marcus finally trying to promote you again. No, different offer. He handed her a business card. Security consulting firm. They want me to head up their corporate division. 6 figures, benefits regular hours. Rachel studied the card. It was a good firm, legitimate, the kind of opportunity that could change their financial dynamic entirely. What did you tell them? That I'd think about it. And what are you thinking? Jake was quiet for a moment, watching the street. I'm thinking that 6 months ago I would have said no immediately. Too much pride. Now I'm thinking about Ellie's college fund, about being able to contribute equally to our life. You do contribute equally. You know what I mean. She did. The money disparity was always there, unspoken but present. Jake never complained, but she saw him calculate costs, saw him choose the cheaper option reflexively, saw him work extra shifts to afford things she could buy without thinking. "Take it," she said. He looked at her in surprise. "Really? If it's what you want. If it would make you happy." Happy might be strong, but it would make me feel useful in a way that matters to our future. "Then take it." Jake called the next day and accepted. His last shift at this Crystal Garden was emotional. Marcus actually cried, and the entire staff signed a baseball bat as a going-away present. "For your new corporate security," Marcus explained, "when board members get out of line." Jake started his new job the following Monday, and Rachel watched him transform, not into someone different, but into someone more complete. He was good at it, reading threats, protecting assets, teaching executives how to stay safe in an unsafe world. The military bearing that had seemed out of place in a restaurant fit perfectly in corporate security. "You're happy," Rachel observed after his first month. "I'm satisfied. It feels like I'm using my skills for something that matters to our family." The Crystal Garden mattered too. It did. But this matters differently. This is building something. They were all building something, Rachel realized. Not just careers or wealth, but a life layer by layer, choice by choice. The call came on a Tuesday. Rachel was in a board meeting when her assistant interrupted something she'd been instructed never to do unless it was an emergency. "It's Ellie's school," Diane whispered. Rachel's blood turned to ice. She was out of the boardroom before Diane finished the sentence, "Jake's new office, her first call." "There was an incident," the principal said when they arrived together. "Ellie's fine, but there was an altercation. They found Ellie in the nurse's office, ice pack on her knuckles, defiance radiating from every 10-year-old inch." "What happened?" Jake asked, kneeling beside her. "Brad Thompson said working people were lazy parasites who should be grateful for handouts from job creators like his dad. I explained that wasn't true. He insisted. I insisted back." "With your fist?" Rachel asked. "Words weren't working." Jake bit back a laugh while Rachel tried to look stern. "Violence isn't the answer, Ellie. Sometimes it's the only language bullies understand. Dad taught me that. I taught you self-defense, not offense." "He pushed me first. That makes it defense." The principal, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson, intervened. "Regardless of who started it, fighting is against school policy. Ellie will be suspended for 3 days. "And Brad?" Rachel asked in her CEO voice. "Brad's parents have made a substantial donation to—" "I see." Rachel stood. "Mrs. Patterson, are you familiar with educational law regarding discriminatory discipline practices?" "I don't think what my legal team does. They think quite extensively about such matters. Now you can suspend both children or neither, but selective punishment based on financial contributions would be inadvisable." Mrs. Patterson looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "Perhaps we could resolve this with detention for both students." "Perhaps we could." In the car afterward, Ellie asked, "Am I in trouble?" "Yes," Jake said. "No," Rachel said simultaneously. They looked at each other over Ellie's head. "You're in trouble for fighting," Jake clarified, "but not for standing up for working people." "Even though violence is never the answer," Rachel added. "Except when it is," Ellie said sagely. "We're terrible parents," Rachel muttered. "The worst," Jake agreed. "Pizza for dinner." Pizza sounds perfect. That night after Ellie was asleep, they sat on their front steps again, sharing a bottle of wine that cost more than Jake used to make in a week. "She's becoming interesting," Rachel said. "She's becoming you. Fierce, uncompromising, willing to fight for what she believes. She's becoming you too, protective, loyal, ready to stand between the vulnerable and danger. God help her teachers. God help anyone who gets in her way." They laughed, the sound echoing down the quiet street. Inside, their daughter slept, probably dreaming of revolutions. Above, stars struggled to shine through the city's glow. And there on the steps, two people who'd found each other across impossible odds held hands and planned a future that made no sense except to them. The autumn Ellie turned 12, everything changed again. Rachel had just closed the biggest deal of her career, a merger that would make Bennett Industries the third largest firm in their sector, when Jake came home from work with an expression she'd never seen before. "We need to talk," he said, and Rachel's stomach dropped. In her experience, nothing good ever followed those words. They waited until Ellie was at soccer practice, then sat at their kitchen table, the same one they'd assembled together their first week in the brownstone, Jake reading instructions while Rachel confidently put pieces together wrong. "I got a call today," Jake began, "from Colonel Harrison, my old CO." But Rachel waited, knowing Jake would tell it in his own time. "There's a situation. Former interpreter from my unit guy named Amir. He worked with us for 3 years in Afghanistan, saved my life twice, saved dozens of Americans. We promised him a visa when things went bad. That was 7 years ago. And he's been waiting in a refugee camp since then. His family's been targeted. His oldest son was killed last year. Harrison's been fighting the bureaucracy, but..." Jake rubbed his face, exhaustion written in every line. "They're going to deny his application. Some paperwork issue, security concern that's complete bullshit. He'll be dead within a month if he goes back." Rachel already knew what Jake was going to ask. "What do you need?" "I need to go there. To Pakistan, where the camp is. Harrison thinks if we can get media attention, if we make noise, maybe we can shame them into action." "How long?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Rachel wanted to say no, wanted to keep him safe in their carefully constructed life. But she saw the weight in his eyes, the soldier's debt that never quite got paid. "When do you leave?" Jake looked at her with such gratitude it broke her heart. "You're not going to fight me on this. Would it work if I did?" "No, but it would make leaving harder." "Then go. Do what you need to do. We'll be here when you get back." Telling Ellie was harder. She was old enough now to understand danger, to know that not everyone who left came back. "Why do you have to go?" she asked, not quite meeting Jake's eyes. "Because I owe him. Because promises should mean something. Because sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing." "Mom could hire lawyers, make calls." "I am making calls," Rachel interjected. "But sometimes systems don't respond to pressure from the outside. Sometimes you need someone on the ground making noise where it can't be ignored." Ellie was quiet for a long moment, processing with that intensity she'd inherited from both parents. "Will you be safe?" "As safe as I can be," Jake said, which wasn't really an answer. "Promise you'll come back." "I promise." The night before he left, they made love with a desperation that reminded Rachel of their early days when everything felt fragile and temporary. Afterward, Jake held her like he was memorizing the feel of her. "I'm coming back," he said into the darkness. "You better. We have Ellie's parent-teacher conference next month, and I'm not explaining her math grades alone." He laughed, but it was hollow. They both knew the statistics, the things that could go wrong, the promises that became lies through no fault of the promiser. Jake left on a Tuesday morning, ordinary, except for the weight of goodbye. Ellie hugged him at the door for so long Rachel thought she might never let go. "Bring Mr. Amir back with you," Ellie said finally. "We have room." "That's the plan, baby." The house felt wrong without him, too quiet, too still, like a clock that had stopped ticking. Rachel threw herself into work, while Ellie threw herself into soccer and school, both of them moving through days that felt like holding their breath. Jake called when he could, the connection terrible, his voice thin across the distance. "How is it?" Rachel asked on day 3. "Complicated. The camp is..." "It's bad, Rachel. Worse than I imagined. Amir's family is down to nothing. His wife is sick, his remaining kids are starving. I've been fighting with State Department reps all day." "Is Harrison there?" "Yeah, and 2 other guys from the unit. We're making noise, but nobody wants to listen. Keep pushing. I'm working my contacts here." "I know you are. I love you. Come home safe." On day 7, the news broke. Former Marines camping outside the embassy in Islamabad, demanding action for abandoned interpreters. Jake's photo was in the Times, standing at attention in his dress blues in 100-degree heat, holding a sign that just said "Promises Matter." Rachel's phone exploded. Board members, society friends, everyone wanting to know what her husband was doing, whether this was some publicity stunt. "My husband is honoring a debt," she told Richard when he called. "Something you might not understand. This could affect the merger." "Then it affects the merger. Some things matter more than money." "Not in our world." "Then maybe I'm not in your world anymore." She hung up and called her media contacts instead. If Jake was making noise there, she'd make noise here. By evening, 3 major news networks had picked up the story. Promises. Matter started trending. Veterans organizations mobilized. Ellie watched the coverage with fierce pride. Dad's famous. Dad's brave, Rachel corrected. Fame is just a side effect. On day 10, Jake called with news. They're reconsidering. The media pressure is working, but Amir's wife needs medical attention now, not when bureaucrats decide to act. What do you need? Money for a private hospital, maybe $10,000. Done. What else? Lawyers, good ones. Ones who know immigration law. I'll have a team there tomorrow. Rachel. This matters to you, so it matters to me. Bring them home. Jake. The breakthrough came on day 14. Rachel had leveraged every contact called in, every favor threatened and cajoled and maneuvered with all the skill that had built her empire. The State Department, facing a public relations nightmare and political pressure from multiple directions, approved emergency visas for Amir and his family. We did it, Jake said when he called, and she could hear him crying. We actually did it. When are you coming home? 4 days. We need to get them processed on a plane, make sure they're really safe. Those 4 days felt like 4 years. Rachel and Ellie tracked flights. Obsessively watched news coverage of the interpreter families boarding planes to America, searched for Jake's face in every crowd shot. Then finally on a Thursday evening, the front door opened and Jake was there. Thinner, exhausted, sunburned, but there. Whole. Home. Ellie hit him like a missile, nearly knocking him over. Rachel waited her turn, then held him like she might never let go. You did it, she whispered. We did it. Your lawyers, your connections, your pressure, none of this happens without you. None of it happens without you being willing to go to stand to fight. That night, after Ellie finally agreed to go to bed, they sat in their living room and Jake told her everything. The conditions in the camp, the bureaucratic nightmares, the moment when Amir's 10-year-old daughter had hugged him and said, "Thank you." In perfect English, she'd been practicing for years, hoping for America. They're in Houston now, Jake said. Another Marines family is helping them get settled. But they want to come to New York eventually. Amir's wife's sister lives in Queens. We'll help when they're ready, Rachel said. Whatever they need. That could be a lot. Then it's a lot. We have a lot to give. Jake looked at her with wonder. How did I get so lucky? Luck had nothing to do with it. You earned this, earned us by being who you are. The merger went through despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it. Bennett Industries stock actually rose, investors apparently appreciating a CEO whose family honored commitments. Richard grumbled about unnecessary drama, but even he couldn't argue with the numbers. Life settled back into routine, but something had shifted. Jake walked taller, some weight lifted that he'd carried since leaving the Marines. He'd paid a debt, kept a promise, proven that the man he'd been and the man he'd become were the same at the core. 6 months later, Amir and his family moved to Queens. Jake helped them find an apartment. Rachel helped Amir find a job. Ellie helped the kids with English homework. The families became intertwined Sunday dinners, alternating between households, cultures blending in the way only New York allowed. You gave us life, Amir said one evening, watching their children play together in Prospect Park. You gave me purpose, Jake replied. We're even. But they weren't even, couldn't be. Some debts transcended accounting, some bonds transcended explanation. They were just families now, connected by choice and chance, and the kind of courage that crossed oceans. I want to do more, Jake said to Rachel that night. There are so many interpreters still waiting, still abandoned. So we do more, Rachel said simply. We set up a foundation. Use my money. Your connections make real change. The board will hate it. The board can adapt. Besides, corporate philanthropy is very trendy. They launched the Wallace Foundation, named for Mike Wallace, the Marine who died saving Jake's unit 6 weeks later. It provided legal assistance, resettlement support, and advocacy for interpreters and their families. Jake ran it with the same precision he'd once planned missions. Rachel funded it with the same strategy she'd once executed takeovers. Ellie, now 13 and even more formidable, created a social media campaign that went viral. My dad says promises should mean something. America promised. Time to deliver. The hashtag time to deliver. generated millions of impressions, thousands of donations, and enough political pressure to affect policy. "We're actually doing it," Jake said one evening, looking at the latest numbers. 17 families resettled, 40 more in process. "We're making a difference." "You're making a difference?" Rachel corrected. "I'm just writing checks." "You're doing a hell of a lot more than that." She was. Rachel had become the public face of the foundation, testifying before Congress, arm-twisting billionaires at galas, turning her corporate ruthlessness toward humanitarian ends. It was still conquest, just a different kind of war. The surprise pregnancy happened when Ellie was 14. Rachel was 41, Jake 43, and they'd never even discussed more children. The assumption had been that Ellie was enough, was everything. "I'm pregnant," Rachel said, holding the test like it might explode. Jake stared at her, then at the test, then back at her. "But you're on—" "The pill isn't perfect. Nothing's perfect." She sat down hard on their bed. "I'm pregnant." "Okay," Jake said slowly. "Okay. How do you feel about that?" "I don't know." Terrified, excited, confused. "I'm 41, Jake. The risks are manageable. The question is, do you want this?" Rachel thought about their life, carefully balanced between 2 careers and 1 child. A baby would destroy that balance, create chaos they'd spent years organizing away. "Do you?" she asked instead. Jake sat beside her, took her hand. "I want whatever you want. But if you're asking if I'd love another child, our child, then yes, God, yes." They told Ellie the next day, braced for teenage drama. Instead, she pumped her fist in the air. "Finally, I've been asking for a sibling since I was 8. "You have?" Jake asked, bewildered. "Not out loud. I knew you guys had enough to deal with, but yeah, being an only child is lonely sometimes." Rachel pulled her close. "You're not lonely, are you?" "Not anymore, but a baby would be cool. I can teach it everything." "God help us," Jake muttered, but he was smiling. The pregnancy was complicated age stress, a body that had prioritized career over biology for decades. Rachel was put on modified bed rest at 20 weeks, forced to work from home, to delegate in ways that went against every instinct. "I'm losing my mind," she told Jake after a week of enforced rest. "You're growing a human. That's a full-time job. I've run Fortune 500 companies. I can handle multitasking." "Not this time. This time you rest." She fought him, of course. Took calls from bed-reviewed documents between doctor's appointments, drove Diane crazy with demands for updates. But slowly she learned to let go, to trust her team, to focus on the flutter of movement inside her that meant life was happening despite her plans. The baby came early, as Rachel had come to everything impatient, demanding attention, refusing to wait for the scheduled cesarean. Jake drove through 3 red lights getting to the hospital, while Ellie called 911 just in case they didn't make it. "We're fine," Jake told the dispatcher. "My daughter's just dramatic." "I'm prepared," Ellie protested. "I watched YouTube videos on emergency delivery." "Please don't deliver your sibling," Rachel gasped between contractions. They made it to the hospital with minutes to spare. James Walker was born at 11:47 p.m., 6 pounds of fury and perfection, with Rachel's sharp features and Jake's calm eyes. "He's so small," Ellie whispered, holding her brother for the first time. "So were you once," Jake said, and Rachel saw him flash back to another hospital, another baby, another life. "Mom would have loved him," Ellie said quietly, and Rachel's heart broke a little. Even now, even with their beautiful blended family, Sarah's ghost lingered gently, a reminder of love and loss intertwined. "She would have," Jake agreed, "and she would have loved that you're here to be his big sister." Bringing James home shifted everything again. The brownstone that had felt spacious now felt full baby gear everywhere, Ellie's teenage energy mixing with infant needs. Rachel tried to maintain her work schedule, but James had other ideas demanding attention with the same insistence she brought to board meetings. "He's definitely your son," Jake said at 3 a.m., walking the floors with a screaming James while Rachel pumped milk and answered emails simultaneously. "He's stubborn like you," she countered. "We're doomed," Ellie said from her doorway. "Can I try—" She took James with the confidence of someone who'd been preparing for this moment, and miraculously, he quieted. "How?" Jake asked. "I don't know. Maybe he knows I'm the fun one." James changed their rhythm, but didn't break it. Rachel learned to conduct board meetings with spit up on her designer blazers. Jake perfected the art of tactical planning around nap schedules. Ellie became the third parent teaching her brother about everything from proper soccer form demonstrated with stuffed animals to social justice simplified but passionate. "We need a bigger place," Rachel said when James started crawling their brownstone, suddenly feeling like an obstacle course. "Or less stuff," Jake suggested. "Have you met us?" "We don't do less." They found a place in Brooklyn Heights, a renovated mansion that had been split into condos now being sold whole again. It was excessive by any measure, but it had room for everyone and everything. Jake's workshop, Rachel's office, Ellie's teenage kingdom, James's nursery, and space for the life they were still building. "This is insane," Jake said, looking at the price. "This is investment," Rachel corrected. "In our family, our future, our foundation work." The foundation had grown beyond their wildest expectations. They'd helped resettle over 100 families, influenced policy changes, created a model other organizations copied. Jake testified before Congress, his quiet authority more powerful than any politician's rhetoric. Rachel leveraged her network ruthlessly, turning corporate dinners into fundraising opportunities. "You've changed," Richard told her at a gala where she'd just extracted $1 million pledge from a pharmaceutical CEO. "The killer instinct's still there, but the target's different." "The target was never just money," Rachel replied. "It was impact. This is just bigger impact." They were honoring at the gala for their work the Walker Foundation's 5th anniversary. Jake wore his dress blues, uncomfortable as always with attention. Rachel wore the same designer she'd worn to their wedding, a deliberate callback to beginnings. Ellie, now 16 and stunning, presented the award with a speech that made hardened executives cry. "My dad taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid," she said. "It's about doing the right thing despite the fear. My mom taught me that success isn't about what you achieve, but what you enable others to achieve. Together they taught me that love isn't just a feeling, but an action repeated daily, especially when it's hard." Afterward, at the after-party, in their new home filled with Marines and CEOs, refugees, and billionaires, teenagers and toddlers, Rachel stood on their terrace looking out at the city lights. "Regrets?" Jake asked, joining her with James sleeping on his shoulder. "None," she said, then reconsidered. "One." "What?" "I wish we'd met sooner, had more time." "We have exactly the time we're supposed to have," Jake said. "Before wouldn't have been right. We weren't ready. And now we're exactly where we're supposed to be." Ellie appeared with Amir's daughter, both of them laughing about something on their phones. The party hummed behind them with the sound of lives intersecting, worlds colliding and combining. James stirred but didn't wake safe in his father's arms. "The financial advisors say I should retire," Rachel said suddenly. "Cash out, focus on the foundation full-time." "What do you say?" "I say I'm 43 with 2 kids and a husband who still looks at me like I'm magic. I say I've got at least another decade of fights in me." "Then fight," Jake said simply. "I'll be right beside you. Even when I'm impossible. Especially then. That's when you're most interesting." They stood there together, a family forged from loss and hope, from different worlds that shouldn't have intersected but did. Below them, New York churned on indifferent to their small miracle. Above them, stars fought through light pollution persistent in their distant burning. "Mom, Dad," Ellie called from inside. "Uncle Marcus is doing his Marine stories again, and they're getting weird." "We should intervene," Rachel said. "We should." Jake agreed, but neither moved. Instead, they stood on their terrace, holding their son, watching their daughter laugh, surrounded by the life they'd built against all odds and logic. It wasn't the life either had planned, but it was the life they'd chosen together, one impossible day at a time. "I love you," Rachel said, the words still feeling new after all this time. "I love you too," Jake replied. "All of you. This whole beautiful, chaotic, impossible life." James woke, then reaching for his mother with the demanding certainty of someone who'd never doubted love's response. Rachel took him and Jake wrapped his arms around them both. And for a moment, just a moment, everything was perfect. Not perfect like a magazine cover or a business plan executed flawlessly, but perfect like a pie with a broken crust that still tasted like home, like a school play where everyone forgot their lines, but nobody cared, like a marriage between two people who shouldn't work but did, like a family built. Not from conventional plans, but from the radical act of choosing each other again and again, despite the odds. "Come on," Ellie called again. "The cake's ready, and if we don't sing soon, James is going to destroy it." They went inside to their party, to their people, to their purpose-filled life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, board meetings, and baby teeth hostile takeovers, and homework, help, foundation work, and family dinners. But tonight in this house full of love and laughter, they were simply, impossibly home. The Walker Foundation's 10-year anniversary gala was held at the Crystal Garden Marcus, having donated the space with tears in his eyes. "This is where it all started," he said. "Where else could we celebrate?" Jake stood at the podium where he'd once cleaned tables, looking out at a crowd that included senators and refugees, billionaires and busboys. Ellie, now 21 and fresh from Columbia with a degree in international relations, stood beside him. James, 6, and wearing a tiny suit that Rachel had insisted on, fidgeted next to his mother. 10 years ago. Jake began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that still made rooms fall silent. "I made a promise to a man who'd save my life. It took too long to keep that promise, but when I finally did, I learned something. Every promise kept creates ripples. Every life saved saves others." He talked about the 500 families they'd helped resettle, the policy changes they'd influenced, the model they'd created that other countries were now adopting. But mostly, he talked about promises, the ones we keep, the ones we break, and the ones that keep us. "My wife once told me that deserve is a stupid word," he said, finding Rachel's eyes in the crowd. "That we don't deserve anything, we just get what we get and make the best of it. But I disagree. We deserve the promises we keep. We deserve the love we give. We deserve the families we choose and the ones that choose us back." Rachel wiped tears she'd deny later while James loudly whispered, "Is Daddy almost done? I need to pee." The crowd laughed, the moment broken, and made more perfect for it. Later, as the party wound down, Rachel found Jake on the same spot where he'd once stood between her and danger all those years ago. "Full circle," she said. "More like a spiral," Jake replied. "Same place, different level." "Very philosophical for a security consultant? Very romantic for a CEO." "Former CEO," Rachel corrected. She'd stepped down the month before maintaining ownership, but passing daily operations to her hand-picked successor. "Now I'm just a foundation president and professional pain in the ass." "My favorite kind." They watched Ellie work the room with Rachel's strategic mind, and Jake's genuine warmth, watched James charm everyone with his father's quiet confidence, and his mother's sharp wit watched the life they'd built pulse with purpose and possibility. "No regrets?" Jake asked their old ritual. "None," Rachel said, "except maybe your hair. What's happening there?" "It's distinguished gray." "It's certainly something." He pulled her close, and they swayed slightly, dancing to music only they could hear. Around them, their worlds continued to merge and multiply, creating something neither Queens nor Manhattan, neither corporate nor military, but uniquely theirs. "Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad." Ellie appeared beside them. James just told Senator Williams that his speech was boring and he should use more dinosaur facts. "That's our boy," Jake said with pride. "We should probably intervene," Rachel suggested. "Probably." They all agreed, but for a moment longer, they stood together in the place where it all began. Three people who'd chosen each other despite the odds, who'd built a family from broken pieces and stubborn love, who'd learned that sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the spaces between worlds. Then James's voice rose above the crowd. "Did you know velociraptors were actually only the size of turkeys?" "Okay, intervention time." Rachel laughed, and they moved together toward their youngest member, ready to save the senator or join James's dinosaur lecture, whichever seemed more necessary. The Crystal Garden glowed around them, witness to their beginning and their becoming, to the quiet moment when a Marine in an apron had changed everything by simply refusing to stand aside. In the end, that's all any of them had done, refused to stand aside from love, from duty, from the promises that make us human. The story continues, of course. Lives don't end with neat conclusions, and families like theirs generate new chapters daily. But if there was a moment to pause to see the arc of their unlikely journey, it was this: a gala celebrating promises kept, a family forged from chance and choice, and the certain knowledge that sometimes, against all logic and probability, love finds a way. The rest, as James would say with six-year-old certainty, is just details and dinosaur facts. Important, sure, but not as important as this. They chose each other, and they kept choosing each other, and in that choosing, they built something worth more than all the mergers and missions combined. A family. Their family. Home.